December 18th, 1972, 7:30 in the evening, Hanoi time. In the pitch-black darkness of the North Vietnamese night, radar operators stare at their screens in climate-controlled bunkers deep beneath the earth. They have been at war for 7 years. They have seen everything America can throw at them. Rolling thunder, linebacker one, thousands of tactical strikes, hundreds of thousands of tons of bombs. But tonight, something different is coming. 20 miles away, at Andersen Air Force Base on the island of Guam, Major Bill Stocker climbs the ladder into his B-52 Stratofortress. The aircraft is called Rose 1. It weighs 160,000 pounds empty. Tonight, loaded with fuel and bombs, it weighs nearly 500,000 pounds. 8 jet engines. A wingspan wider than a football field is long. A tail gun with 4 50 caliber machine guns. And in the bomb bay, 36 500-pound bombs. Rose 1 is not alone. Make sure you subscribe to our channel to discover more untold stories from history. Behind Stocker, 86 more B-52 bombers are taxiing, engines screaming, waiting their turn to launch. It takes nearly 2 hours for all of them to get airborne. This is the largest bomber strike since World War II, the biggest aerial armada America has assembled in 27 years. And Major Bill Stocker is leading it straight into the most heavily defended airspace in the history of warfare. The target, Hanoi, the capital of North Vietnam, a city protected by over 200 surface-to-air missile sites, thousands of anti-aircraft guns, MiG fighters on alert, and a defense network controlled by Soviet technicians who have been waiting years for this moment, the chance to test their weapons against American heavy bombers. Tonight marks the beginning of Operation Linebacker 2, the Christmas bombings. 11 days of round-the-clock aerial assault, the most intense bombing campaign of the entire Vietnam War. A campaign that will see B-52s go down in flames over Hanoi. That will push American air crews to the breaking point. That will very nearly fail in its first 72 hours. And that will, in the end, force North Vietnam back to the negotiating table and bring America's longest war to a close. This is the story of those 11 days. The story of young men flying aging bombers into a firestorm. The story of missiles that lit up the night sky like the 4th of July. The story of tactical blunders that cost lives and the airmen who refused to die for them. The story of how Strategic Air Command almost lost this battle before it began. And how, in the final desperate days, American ingenuity and courage turned near disaster into victory. This is Operation Linebacker 2. To understand why Operation Linebacker 2 happened, we need to go back 3 months. To October 26, 1972. Henry Kissinger, President Richard Nixon's national security advisor, stands before television cameras in the White House briefing room. He has just returned from secret negotiations in Paris with Le Duc Tho, North Vietnam's lead negotiator. The presidential election is 11 days away. Nixon is running for re-election, and the Vietnam War is the issue that could cost him everything. For 4 years, Nixon has been promising to end the war with honor. For 4 years, the war has dragged on. Young Americans continue dying. The anti-war movement has torn the country apart. The public wants out. And now, Kissinger delivers the line that will echo through history. We believe that peace is at hand. Peace is at hand. Those 4 words are a bombshell. They suggest that after 8 years of war, after 58,000 American deaths, after 1 million Vietnamese casualties, the end is finally in sight. An agreement has been reached. The United States will withdraw its remaining forces. North Vietnam will stop fighting. Prisoners of war will be returned. South Vietnam will be allowed to exist. Elections will be held. It sounds too good to be true, and as it turns out, it is. The agreement has problems. Big problems. President Nguyen Van Thieu of South Vietnam is furious. He has not been consulted. He does not trust the North Vietnamese. He looks at the terms and sees his country being sold out. The agreement allows North Vietnamese troops to remain in South Vietnam after the ceasefire. How is that peace? How is that security? Teo digs in his heels. He refuses to sign. Meanwhile, in Hanoi, the North Vietnamese begin changing their position. In October, they seemed eager to make a deal. Now, suddenly, they are adding new demands. They want political concessions. They want more control over the post-war government. They want guarantees that the Americans will never return. The negotiations stall. Then they collapse completely. By mid-December, the talks are dead. Nixon is enraged. He has just won re-election in a landslide. He has a mandate. He has promised the American people an end to the war. And now, just weeks before his second inauguration, the North Vietnamese are backing out of the deal. In Nixon's view, they are playing games, stalling, hoping that domestic pressure will force him to accept worse terms, hoping that Congress, which will be controlled by Democrats when it convenes in January, will cut off funding for the war. Nixon decides he has one card left to play, one way to force Hanoi's hand. On December 13th, he suspends the Paris peace talks. Then he sends a message to the North Vietnamese through Soviet intermediaries. Resume negotiations in good faith, or face the consequences. He gives them 72 hours to respond. The deadline passes. No response. On December 17, Nixon calls his Joint Chiefs of Staff into the Oval Office. He gives them an order that will change everything. You are to commence at approximately 1200 Zulu, that is, 7 p.m. Hanoi time, 18 December 1972. A 3-day maximum effort, repeat maximum effort, of B-52 and tactical airstrikes in the Hanoi-Haiphong areas. Objective is maximum destruction of selected military targets in vicinity of Hanoi and Haiphong. Maximum effort, maximum destruction. This is not rolling thunder with its graduated pressure and limited strikes. This is not the careful, controlled bombing that characterized much of the war. This is unleashing the full weight of American air power. This is strategic bombing in the tradition of World War II. This is shock and awe before that term was invented. The Joint Chiefs are stunned. They have been advocating for unrestricted bombing of the North for years. Now, finally, they are being allowed to do it. But there is a catch. They have less than 24 hours to plan the most complex air operation since World War II. At Strategic Air Command headquarters in Omaha, Nebraska, the order arrives like a thunderclap. SAC is the command responsible for America's nuclear bomber force. The B-52 Stratofortress is their aircraft. For 15 years, SAC has been planning to fight World War III. Nuclear war. Flying over the Soviet Union, dropping thermonuclear weapons, destroying cities. Their tactics, their training, their entire institutional culture is built around that mission. But this is not nuclear war. This is conventional bombing. And the target is not Russia. It is North Vietnam, a small country with a defense system supplied by Russia and manned partly by Soviet technicians. A defense system that has been refined over 7 years of war. A defense system specifically designed to destroy B-52 bombers. SAC scrambles to put together a plan. They only have hours. They fall back on what they know. Operation Arc Light. Arc Light is the codename for B-52 operations over South Vietnam and Laos. For 8 years, B-52s have been conducting Arc Light missions, dropping bombs on suspected enemy positions in the jungle, supporting American ground troops, interdicting supply routes. It is dangerous work, but it is also relatively predictable. The enemy has limited air defenses in the south. B-52s fly at high altitude, drop their bombs, and return to base. Losses are minimal, but Hanoi is not the jungle. Hanoi is one of the most heavily defended cities on Earth. And arc light tactics were never designed for strategic bombing against heavily defended targets. This is a problem, a big problem, but SAC does not have time to develop new tactics. The bombers are already being loaded with bombs, crews are being briefed, the operation is a go. There is another problem. The B-52 fleet consists of 2 main variants, the B-52D and the B-52G. The D model is older, first introduced in 1956, but all of the D models have been updated with the latest electronic countermeasures equipment, advanced jammers to confuse enemy radars, systems to detect and evade surface-to-air missiles. The D models are ready for this mission. The G models are newer, introduced in 1959, but only about half of them have been upgraded with the advanced electronic countermeasures. The rest have older, less capable systems. When Strategic Air Command rushed B-52Gs from bases in the United States to Guam during the Easter Offensive earlier in 1972, There was not time to upgrade them all. Now those aircraft, with inferior defensive systems, are about to fly into the teeth of the most sophisticated air defense network in the world. This too is a problem, but there is no time to fix it. The bombers will fly. Before we watch the bombers take off, we need to understand what they are flying into. Because North Vietnam's air defenses in December of 1972 are unlike anything American airmen have ever faced. The centerpiece of this defense is the SA-2 Guideline surface-to-air missile. This is a Soviet-designed weapon, first deployed in 1957. It is a two-stage missile. On the ground, it sits on a rail launcher, pointed at the sky, 35 feet long, and looking like a telephone pole with fins. When launched, the first stage booster fires, sending the missile screaming upward at over 3 times the speed of sound. At altitude, the booster separates and the second stage takes over, guiding the missile toward its target. The SA-2 carries a 288-pound warhead, high explosive, proximity fused, meaning it does not have to hit the aircraft directly. If it passes within 65 feet, the warhead detonates, sending shrapnel ripping through wings, engines, and fuselage. One hit is usually enough to bring down a B-52. The missile can reach altitudes of 60,000 feet. It can engage targets up to 30 miles away, and it is surprisingly accurate when properly employed. Each SA-2 battalion consists of 6 launchers, a fire control radar called the fan song, acquisition radars, and a command post. Multiple battalions can work together, creating overlapping fields of fire. By December 1972, North Vietnam has 36 SA-2 battalions. At least 18 of them are concentrated around Hanoi and Haiphong. That is over 200 missile launchers, and they have stockpiles of missiles. Estimates vary, but intelligence suggests they have at least 800 SA-2 missiles available at the start of Linebacker 2. Maybe more. These missiles are not operated solely by North Vietnamese crews. Soviet technicians are present at many sites, advising, training, sometimes actually manning the equipment. The Russians are very interested in this war. They want to know how their weapons perform against American aircraft. They want to test their tactics. They want data. Every B-52 that falls from the sky is a test case, a proof of concept. Intelligence they can take back to Moscow. But the SA-2 is not the only threat. North Vietnam has thousands of anti-aircraft guns, 37mm, 57mm, 85mm, 100mm. These guns are radar-directed and highly accurate. They create a wall of steel in the sky. A B-52 flying through a barrage of anti-aircraft fire is like sailing a ship through a hurricane of shrapnel. And then there are the MiGs. The North Vietnamese Air Force has 71 operational aircraft. 31 MiG-21s and 16 MiG-17s are available for combat. The MiG-21 is a modern interceptor, fast and agile, armed with air-to-air missiles and cannons. Only 13 MiG-21 pilots are trained for night operations, but that is enough to be a threat. The MiG-17 is older, slower, but deadly at close range with its cannons. All of these defenses are coordinated by a sophisticated command and control network. Ground control intercept radars track incoming aircraft. The data is fed to a central command post. Air defense commanders decide how to allocate their resources, which missile batteries to activate, which fighters to scramble, where to concentrate fire. This is not a random chaotic defense. This is an integrated air defense system, Soviet-designed and Soviet-advised. It is, in many ways, more sophisticated than anything the Germans had, protecting the Ruhr Valley in World War II. And American planners know all of this. They have been studying North Vietnamese defenses for years. They have reconnaissance photos. They have intelligence from signal intercepts. They know where the missile sites are. They know the capabilities of the SA-2. They know this is going to be dangerous, but they also believe they have advantages. The B-52 carries powerful electronic countermeasures, jammers that can blind enemy radars, chaff dispensers that create clouds of metal strips to confuse tracking systems. When B-52s fly in formation, that specifically in 3 ship cells, their jamming combines to create a bubble of electromagnetic noise that makes it very difficult for SA-2 radars to get a lock. In theory, the bombers should be able to penetrate the defenses, drop their bombs, and escape before the enemy can react. In theory. December 18th, afternoon. Andersen Air Force Base, Guam. The briefing room is packed. Dozens of B-52 crews crowd in, filling every seat, standing along the walls. These are young men, most in their 20s and early 30s. Pilots, co-pilots, navigators, electronic warfare officers, radar navigators, gunners. Each bomber has a crew of 6. Tonight, over 500 men will fly into combat. Many of them have flown arc-light missions over South Vietnam. Some have hundreds of combat hours. But those missions were different. They flew over jungle at night, dropped their bombs on coordinates provided by ground controllers, and flew home. Safe, predictable, almost routine. Tonight is not routine. Tonight, they are going to Hanoi. The operations officer stands at the front of the room. Behind him is a large map of North Vietnam. Red circles mark known SAM sites. There are a lot of red circles around Hanoi. An awful lot. The briefing stated begins. The targets, military installations, rail yards, storage facilities, airfields, power plants. 34 targets in the Hanoi-Haiphong area. The objectives: destroy North Vietnam's ability to wage war, destroy their logistics, destroy their industry, force them back to the negotiating table. The plan: 3 waves of bombers. Wave 1 launches from Guam at 3 p.m. local time. 87 B-52s. They will fly east, then north. A 6-hour journey across the Pacific. They will refuel from tankers over the South China Sea. Then they will turn west and head for North Vietnam, arriving over target around 7:30 p.m. Hanoi time. Wave 2, 42 bombers from U Tapao Air Base in Thailand, will follow 3 hours later. Wave 3, another group from Guam, will hit 4 hours after Wave 1. Each wave will approach the targets from the same direction. Each wave will fly at the same altitude, 33,000 to 36,000 feet. Each wave will hit the same targets in the same sequence. And here is the critical detail. After dropping their bombs, each bomber will execute a post-target turn to the west. This is standard procedure for SAC. When you drop a nuclear weapon, you need to turn away immediately to escape the blast. The post-target turn is designed to get the bomber out of the danger zone as fast as possible. But there are no nuclear weapons tonight. And the post-target turn has an unintended consequence in a conventional bombing mission. When a B-52 turns, it banks. The wings tilt. The belly of the aircraft is exposed. And critically, the jamming antennas, which are mounted on the sides of the fuselage, point away from the enemy radars they are supposed to be jamming. For the duration of that turn, maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute, the bomber is vulnerable. The electronic countermeasures are degraded. The radar cross-section is maximized. The aircraft slows down as it turns into a headwind. It becomes, in short, an easy target. Some of the crews, the ones who have been paying attention, recognize the problem. They raise questions. Why are we turning into the wind? Why are we using the same routes every night? Why are we making ourselves predictable? The answers they get are not reassuring. This is how SAC does things. This is doctrine. This is what we have trained for. Trust the plan. The briefing continues. Supporting aircraft are described. F-4 Phantoms will fly ahead, dropping chaff. Clouds of aluminum strips that create false radar returns, confusing enemy tracking systems. The chaff will form corridors, 60 miles long and 5 to 7 miles wide. The B-52s will fly through these corridors, protected by the chaff clouds. F-105 Wild Weasels and F-4s, equipped with anti-radar missiles, will attack SAM sites, trying to suppress the defenses. F-111 attack aircraft will strike airfields, keeping the MiGs on the ground. Fighters will provide combat air patrols, protecting the bombers from enemy. Aircraft. Electronic warfare aircraft, EB-666s, will jam enemy communications. Hundreds of aircraft will be involved. Thousands of men. This is a massive, coordinated operation. The briefing ends. The crews head to their aircraft. Some are excited. Some are nervous. All of them understand that tonight is going to be historic, one way or another. On the flight line, 129 B-52 Stratofortresses sit in long rows. 87 at Andersen. 42 at U Tapao in Thailand. Ground crews have been working for hours, loading bombs, fueling aircraft, conducting pre-flight checks. Each bomber carries between 36 and 42 500-pound bombs, depending on the specific configuration. The total bomb load for Wave 1: over 1,500 tons of explosives. The engines start: 8 turbojet engines per aircraft. Over 1,000 engines roaring to life. The noise is deafening. The smell of jet fuel hangs heavy in the tropical air. At Anderson, it takes nearly 2 hours for all 87 bombers to taxi, take off, and form up. They launch in cells of 3 aircraft. Each cell has a color-coded call sign: rose, olive, ash, tan, quilt, brass, ivory. The formations climb to cruising altitude and head east into the gathering darkness. At Utapao, the 42 bombers of Wave 2 are preparing to launch. Their flight time to target is much shorter, only 3 to 4 hours compared to 6 for the Guam-based aircraft. But they will arrive over Hanoi at the same time as Wave 1. In the cockpit of Rose 1, Major Bill Stocker settles in for a long flight. 6 hours to target. 6 hours of thinking about what is waiting for him over Hanoi. 6 hours to wonder if he will make it back. Behind him, the navigator is plotting the route. The radar navigator is checking his bombing systems. The electronic warfare officer is testing the jammers. The gunner in the tail is checking his 4 50 caliber machine guns. Everyone has a job. Everyone knows that tonight, those jobs might be the difference between life and death. The bombers drone through the night sky. Ahead of them, in the darkness over the South China Sea, KC-135 tankers orbit, waiting to refuel the thirsty jets. Each B-52 takes on thousands of pounds of fuel. The refueling takes 30 minutes. Then the bombers continue north. The sun sets. The sky turns black. There are no lights below, just empty ocean. Then, gradually, the coast of Vietnam appears on the radar. They are entering enemy airspace. At 7 p.m. Hanoi time, F-111 attack aircraft streak in at low altitude, hitting North Vietnamese airfields. 1 minute later, the EB-66 electronic warfare aircraft begin jamming enemy radar frequencies. The operation has begun. 7:15 p.m., December 18th, Hanoi. The city is dark. Blackout conditions. No streetlights. No lights in buildings. The population has been doing this for years. When the Americans bomb, you turn off the lights and take cover. But tonight feels different. North Vietnamese air defense controllers are watching their radar screens and seeing something they have never seen before. Not a handful of aircraft. Not a raid of 20 or 30 planes. Hundreds of aircraft. Coming from multiple directions, the radar screens are lit up like constellations. In Air Defense Headquarters, commanders realize immediately, this is it. This is the big one. The Americans are finally committing their strategic bombers, the B-52s. The bombers they have been training to fight for years. Orders go out to all SAM battalions. Prepare for engagement. Activate fire control radars. Stand by to launch. At 7:25, the first B-52s appear on radar, inbound from the northeast. The chaff corridors laid by the F-4s are working, creating areas of confusion on the radar screens. But the SAM operators are experienced. They can see through the chaff, tracking the bombers by their powerful radar returns. At 7:30 p.m., the first SAMs launch. From the ground, the sight is terrifying and beautiful at the same time. A flash of light as the booster ignites. A roar like a freight train. Then the missile climbs into the night sky, accelerating, leaving a trail of fire. It looks like a telephone pole with a blowtorch attached. The trail lights up the clouds. The entire sky glows. And there is not just one missile. There are dozens. By the time Wave 1 crosses into North Vietnamese airspace, over 200 SAMs are in the air. In the cockpit of Rose 1, Major Bill Stocker sees the launches. Everyone sees them. The electronic warfare officer calls out missile warnings, his voice tight with tension. The radar screens show uplink and downlink signals, the SA-2 guidance radars talking to the missiles. The jammers are working, but the sheer volume of fire is overwhelming. The B-52 cells press on toward their targets. They maintain formation. They do not deviate from the flight path. This is what they have been ordered to do. Stay in formation, trust the jammers, complete the mission. The first wave hits its targets. Radio Hanoi, Phuoc Yên Airfield, Hoa Lac Airfield, Kep Airfield, a warehouse complex at Yen Vian. The bombs fall through the darkness, impacting seconds later. Explosions bloom orange and red, fires erupt, buildings collapse. The rail yards at Yen Vian are devastated, nearly destroyed, but the North Vietnamese are firing everything they have. SAMs streak upward by the dozens. Anti-aircraft guns fill the sky with tracers. And then, at 7:55 p.m., a missile finds its target. Charcoal 01, a B-52G from Anderson, is over its target when the SA-2 hits. The warhead detonates close enough to shred the tail section. The aircraft shakes violently. Alarms scream. Systems fail. The pilot, Colonel Donald Rissy, fights the controls, but the bomber is going down. He orders the crew to bail out. 4 men manage to eject. The navigator, Captain Bob Certain. The radar navigator, Major Dick Johnson. The electronic warfare officer, Captain Hal Wilson. The co-pilot, Lieutenant Colonel Bill Conley. They tumble through the darkness, parachutes deploying, floating down toward North Vietnam. Colonel Rissy and the tail gunner, Master Sergeant Walt Ferguson, do not make it out. They die in the aircraft. Charcoal 01 becomes the first B-52 lost to enemy fire in Operation Linebacker 2. It will not be the last. 2 more bombers are hit during Wave 1. Peach 02, another B-52G, takes a missile over Yen Vian. 6 of the 7 crew members bail out successfully. The 7th is killed in the ejection. Ebony 02, a B-52D from Utah POW, is damaged by a SAM but manages to limp back to Thailand, though it crashes on landing. 5 crew members survive. Wave 1 loses 3 bombers. 5 more are damaged, but they complete the mission. Every assigned target is hit. The rail yards are wrecked. The airfields are cratered. Radio Hanoi goes off the air. 4 hours later, Wave 2 arrives. 93 bombers. They strike the same targets Wave 1 hit, using the same tactics, the same routes, the same altitudes. The North Vietnamese are ready. They have had hours to reposition SAM batteries, to move missiles from storage to launching sites, to prepare. Incredibly, Wave 2 gets through without losses. Not because the defenses are weaker, if anything, they are stronger. But luck is with the Americans tonight. Missiles miss, jammers work. The bombers drop their payloads and turn for home. But Wave 3 is not so fortunate. At 1 a.m. on December 19th, the 3rd wave arrives. 51 B-52s. They approach from the same direction as the first 2 waves. They fly at the same altitude. They hit targets in the Hanoi area, Gia Lam, rail yards, Kin No Repair Complex. The North Vietnamese air defenses have figured out the pattern. They know exactly where the bombers will be. They have moved SAM batteries to cover the approach routes and, critically, the post-target turn points. They know the Americans will turn west after bombing. They have missiles waiting. Rose 1, the same aircraft that led Wave 1, leads Wave 3. Major John Dalton is at the controls this time. As Rose 1 begins its post-target turn, an SA-2 detonates close aboard. The explosion tears a hole in the fuselage large enough for the crew to see the external bomb racks. Seconds later, another missile hits, setting the cockpit on fire. Major Dalton gives the order to bail out. 4 crew members eject successfully and are captured. 2 are killed. Minutes later, Straw 2 takes a hit. The pilot and navigator are wounded, but the tough B-52D manages to make it to Laos before the crew has to abandon the aircraft. 5 survive. The radar navigator is lost. Then Olive 1 is hit during its post-target turn over Kin No. 5 of the 7 crew are killed instantly. 2 become prisoners of war. Tan. 3 at the tail end of Wave 3 takes 2 SAMs, almost simultaneously. The bomber disintegrates so rapidly that only the tail gunner survives, blasting clear in his ejection seat, the only thing that saved his life. Brick 2 is hit, but manages to absorb the damage and make it home. By the time the sun rises on December 19th, the accounting is grim. Out of 129 bombers on day 1, 3 have been shot down. 2 more are heavily damaged. 8 crew members are dead. 9 are prisoners of war. The North Vietnamese have fired over 200 SAMs. At Strategic Air Command headquarters in Omaha, the reports are met with shock. SAC planners had expected losses. This is combat. Men die. But they had not expected losses like this, not on the first night. And the intelligence coming back from the crews is disturbing. The SA-2s are more effective than anticipated. The North Vietnamese are firing missiles in salvos, 6 or 8 at a time, against a single target. They are targeting the bombers during the post-target turns, when they are most vulnerable. But there is a worse problem. Day 2 missions have already launched. Due to the long flight times from Guam, the Day 2 bombers took off before all the Day 1 aircraft returned. There is no time to change the plan. The bombers are already in the air, flying toward the same targets, using the same tactics. This is going to be bad. December 19th, 93 B-52s take off from Guam and U Tapao. The crews have heard about the losses on Day 1. Some are angry, some are scared. All of them know that tonight they are flying into a defense that has killed their friends and is waiting for them. The targets are the same as Day 1, rail yards, storage areas, airfields around Hanoi. The routes are the same, the altitudes are the same, the post-target turns are the same. SAC has made minor adjustments. Bomber cell altitudes are lowered slightly to 34,500 and 35,000 feet to keep them more securely within the chaff corridors. But fundamentally, the plan is unchanged. The North Vietnamese can hardly believe their luck. The Americans are doing the same thing twice. In Air Defense Headquarters, commanders smile. They have plotted the American routes. They have studied the timing. They know where to position their missiles. This is going to be a turkey shoot. At 7:40 p.m., the bombers arrive over Hanoi. The SAMs are already launching before the first bombs fall. The night sky lights up. From Hanoi, civilians watching from bomb shelters see a spectacle unlike anything in the war so far. The entire sky is filled with missile trails. Dozens of streaks of fire, crisscrossing overhead, climbing, turning, hunting. One American pilot later describes it. The SAMs looked like telephone poles with lights on them. When they launched, you would see this white flash on the ground, like a city block exploding. Then the missile would climb, faster than anything you have ever seen, leaving this brilliant trail. When they got up into the clouds, they would create these mushroom-shaped halos of light. Enormous, beautiful, and absolutely terrifying. Because you knew that somewhere, in all of that, was a 288-pound warhead looking for you. Incredibly, despite the intensity of the defenses, no bombers are lost on Day 2. This is partly luck. Partly because the crews are hyper-alert, watching for missiles, ready to react. Partly because the jammers are working better now that the bombers are flying slightly lower, more firmly within the chaff corridors. But mostly, it is luck. SAMs miss by feet, close enough that crews can feel the concussion, close enough to see the flash of the warhead detonating, but not close enough to kill. The bombers drop their payloads and escape to the west, not a single loss. At SAC headquarters, there is cautious optimism. Maybe the plan is working after all. Maybe Day 1 was just bad luck. Maybe the defenses are not as effective as they seemed. This optimism will last exactly 24 hours. December 20th. The bloodiest night of Operation Linebacker 2. 99 B-52s launch for Day 3 missions. The plan, once again, is unchanged. Same targets, same routes, same altitudes, same post-target turns. In North Vietnam, air defense commanders have spent the last 2 days refining their tactics. They have analyzed the American routes, they have timed the waves, they have figured out the post-target turn points, and they have moved SAM batteries into position to ambush the bombers at their most vulnerable moment. They have also learned something critical about the B-52 force. Not all of the bombers have the same electronic countermeasures. The B-52D models have advanced jamming systems. But the B-52G models, at least some of them, have older, less capable equipment. The Gs are easier to track, easier to kill. The North Vietnamese have learned to identify which bombers are Gs and to concentrate fire on them. At 7:30 p.m., Wave 1 arrives over Hanoi. 99 bombers in 3 waves. The targets include Hanoi power plants, rail yards, and military installations. The North Vietnamese are ready. As the bombers approach, SAM batteries launch in rapid succession. 34 missiles are fired in just minutes, saturating the target area. This is not random fire. This is calculated. The missiles are launched to arrive over the target zone at the same time as the bombers, creating a gauntlet of fire. The first cell, callsign Quilt, consists of 3 B-52Gs. These are the aircraft with less capable jammers. They arrive over the NVA complex and begin their bombing run. As they release their weapons and start the post-target turn, the SAMs are waiting. Quilt 3 is hit first. The missile punches through the fuselage and detonates. The aircraft breaks apart. 4 crew members manage to eject and are captured. 2 are killed in the explosion. Moments later, Brasil Cell arrives. These aircraft are also B-52Gs. As they execute their turn, the cell becomes separated. 1 bomber falls behind, slowing. The jammers, which work best when the aircraft are in close formation, lose their effectiveness. The North Vietnamese missile operators see an isolated target. They fire a salvo. 2 SAMs hit Brass 2 almost simultaneously. The bomber explodes in midair. There are no survivors. 7 men die instantly. In the second wave, more bombers are hit. Orange 1 takes a missile, but the tough B-52D manages to stay airborne and makes it to Thailand before crashing. Most of the crew survives. Then, Wave 3 arrives. This is where the carnage really begins. Straw 2 is hit during its bomb run. The pilot and navigator are wounded, but they manage to keep the aircraft flying. 5 crew members survive the crash in Laos. The radar navigator is killed. Olive 1 is hit over the Kin No repair complex during the post-target turn. The missile detonates close aboard. The explosion is catastrophic. 5 of the 7 crew members are killed instantly. 2 eject and become prisoners of war. Tan 3, flying at the tail end of the formation, is bracketed by 2 SAMs. Both missiles hit within seconds of each other. The bomber simply disintegrates. Pieces of wreckage rain down over North Vietnam. Only the tail gunner survives, ejecting in his pressurized compartment, the only thing that saved him from the hypoxic death that killed the rest of his crew at high altitude. Brick 2 is hit but absorbs the damage and makes it home. By the end of day 3, the toll is staggering. 6 B-52s shot down. 2 more heavily damaged. Over 40 crew members killed, missing, or captured. The loss rate is 7%. 7% in a single night. This is unsustainable. This is catastrophic. If losses continue at this rate, the entire B-52 force could be destroyed in a week. At Andersen Air Force Base on Guam, the mood is grim. The crew members who flew tonight and survived come back shaken. They have seen their friends die. They have watched bombers explode in midair. They have flown through a firestorm. And now they are being told to do it again tomorrow night, using the same tactics that got their friends killed. Anger builds, resentment, fear. That night, at the Officers Club on Guam, an impromptu meeting takes place. Bomber crews gather. They drink, they talk, and they make their feelings known. The tactics are suicide. The post-target turns are death traps. Flying the same routes every night is insane. Someone is going to get them all killed if this continues. This is not quite a mutiny, but it is close. Officers are openly questioning orders, saying they will not fly if the tactics do not change. Word gets back to SAC headquarters. At the same time, pressure is coming from other directions. Air Force officers at all levels are watching Linebacker 2 unfold and are horrified by what they are seeing. Experienced tactical commanders, the men who have been flying combat missions over North Vietnam for years, are saying the same thing. SAC's tactics are wrong. Predictable, rigid, based on nuclear war doctrine that does not apply here. Men are dying because Strategic Air Command is fighting the last war instead of this one. The message finally gets through. Changes must be made, quickly. On December 21st, operations are shifted away from Hanoi to Hai Phong. Fewer defenses there, less danger, no losses on day 4. On December 22nd, the bombers return to Hanoi. But something terrible happens. A stick of bombs overshoots Hanoi's Bach Mai airfield and hits Bach Mai Hospital, killing 28 hospital personnel and an unknown number of patients. The incident becomes an international scandal. The United States is accused of deliberately bombing a hospital. Nixon is called a war criminal. The propaganda value for North Vietnam is enormous. On December 23rd and 24th, operations continue, but with mixed results. 1 B-52D is lost. Then, mercifully, a stand down for Christmas Day. The crews get a day of rest, and SAC planners use the time to completely revise the operation. What happens next will save Linebacker 2, and quite possibly win the war. Before we continue with the Christmas pause and what came after, We need to understand who these men were, the crews who flew these missions, because they were not just numbers on a casualty list. They were human beings, young men with families, with hopes, with fears. The typical B-52 crew consists of 6 men. At the front of the aircraft, in the pressurized cockpit, sit the pilot and co-pilot. These are experienced officers, usually captains or majors. The pilot is the aircraft commander, responsible for the entire mission. The co-pilot assists with flying duties and handles many of the systems. Both men have thousands of hours of flight time. They know the B-52 inside and out. Below and behind the pilots, in a cramped compartment accessible only through a tunnel, sit the navigator and the radar navigator. The navigator plots the course, calculates fuel consumption, determines the best routes to and from the target. The radar navigator operates the bombing radar and guides the aircraft to the precise release point. These men work in near total darkness, staring at instruments and screens, their entire world reduced to glowing dials and radar returns. Also in the lower compartment sits the electronic warfare officer. His job is to monitor enemy radar signals, operate the jamming equipment, and warn the crew of incoming threats. He watches his screens constantly during missions over North Vietnam, looking for the telltale signatures of SAM radars locking on. When he sees the signals that indicate a missile launch, he has seconds to react, deploying chaff, activating jammers, warning the pilot. At the very rear of the aircraft, in a separate pressurized compartment, sits the tail, gunner. He is usually an enlisted man, a staff sergeant or technical sergeant. He operates 4 .50 caliber machine guns mounted in the tail. His is the loneliest position on the aircraft. He cannot see the rest of the crew. He cannot communicate easily. He sits facing backward, watching for enemy fighters, ready to engage if they attack. The tail guns are supposed to be defensive weapons, last resort protection against MiGs. But as we have seen, during Linebacker 2, 2 tail gunners shot down MiG-21 interceptors, the only B-52 air-to-air kills in history. These 6 men live together, fly together, trust their lives to each other. They have trained together for months, sometimes years. They know each other's voices, habits, quirks. They know who panics under pressure and who stays calm. They know who you can count on and who might fold. And now they are being asked to fly into the most heavily defended airspace in the world, night after night, with tactics that seem designed to get them killed. Let me tell you about one crew. Aircraft call sign Ruby 03, pilot Captain Bill Jones, co-pilot First Lieutenant Mike Patterson, navigator Captain Tom Chen, radar, navigator Major Steve Wilson, electronic warfare officer Captain Dave McCarthy, tail gunner Staff Sergeant James Parker. Ruby 0, 3 flies out of Utah POW. They have been in country for 8 months, flying arc light missions over South Vietnam and Laos. Routine work, dangerous but manageable. When Linebacker 2 is announced, they know immediately that this will be different. Hanoi, the big one, the mission they have been dreading. On December 18th, Night 1, Ruby 03 is part of Wave 2. They launch from Utah POW at 10 p.m. local time. The flight to Hanoi takes 3 hours. They do not need to refuel. Utah POW is much closer to North Vietnam than Guam. They cross into North Vietnamese airspace around 1 a.m. on December 19th. Captain McCarthy, the electronic warfare officer, is monitoring his screens. He sees SAM radars activating, lots of them. He starts calling out warnings. Fan song radar at 2 o'clock, another at 11 o'clock, multiple radars painting us. He activates the jammers. The aircraft is enveloped in a bubble of electronic noise. They approach the target, a rail yard on the outskirts of Hanoi. Below them, the ground erupts with SAM launches. Staff Sergeant Parker, in the tail, counts over 30 missiles in the air simultaneously. He later describes it. The sky was full of telephone poles. That is what they looked like. Telephone poles on fire, climbing toward us. And I am sitting there with 4 .50 caliber machine guns thinking, what the hell am I supposed to do against that? Ruby 0. 3 drops its bombs and executes the post-target turn. For 30 seconds, they are vulnerable. McCarthy watches his screens in horror as multiple SAM radars lock on. He sees the uplinks. He sees the missiles guiding. He calls out warnings. But there is nothing the pilots can do except pray that the jammers work. A SAM detonates 300 feet away, close enough that the crew feels the concussion, close enough to see the flash. Shrapnel pings off the fuselage, but no critical damage. They keep flying. They escape to the west. They make it home. When they land, the ground crew finds over 40 shrapnel holes in the aircraft. 40. Any one of them could have hit something vital. Hydraulic lines, control cables, fuel tanks. The crew was lucky, incredibly lucky. But luck runs out. Not for Ruby 03, they will fly multiple missions and survive them all. But for others, luck runs out quickly. On night 2, a crew that had survived night 1 draws another mission. Same target, same tactics. This time, their luck does not hold. A SAM hits them during the post-target turn. The aircraft breaks apart at altitude. No one survives. 6 men who were alive at breakfast are dead by midnight. The other crews hear about it. They know these men. They have flown with them, drunk with them, played cards with them, and now they are gone. Just gone, and tomorrow night, it could be them. This is the psychological burden the crews carry. Every mission might be your last. Every launch could be the one where you do not come home. Some men handle it by refusing to think about it. They focus on the job, check the systems, fly the aircraft. Do not think about the missiles. Do not think about dying. Others cannot stop thinking about it. They become fatalistic. Why bother worrying? If a missile has your name on it, there is nothing you can do. Might as well accept it. Some find religion, some write letters home before every mission, just in case. Some make deals with themselves. If I survive this one, I will never do anything risky again. I will live carefully. I will appreciate every day. But they fly. Because that is their job. Because their country asked them to. Because their crew is counting on them. Because they cannot let their friends down. So they climb into the aircraft night after night. And they fly into the firestorm. And some do not come back. The B-52 crews get most of the attention, and rightfully so. They are flying the main missions, taking the biggest risks, suffering the heaviest losses, but they are not alone. Hundreds of other aircraft are involved in Linebacker 2. Thousands of other airmen. The operation is a massive coordinated effort involving every branch of the Air Force, plus Navy and Marine aviation. Let me walk you through a typical mission package, because understanding how all these pieces fit together helps you appreciate the complexity of what is being attempted. Hours before the B-52s arrive, F-111 Aardvark attack aircraft strike North Vietnamese airfields. The F-111 is a revolutionary aircraft, swing-wing, terrain-following radar, capable of penetrating defenses at low altitude and high speed. Their job is to crater runways, destroy parked aircraft, and generally ensure that North Vietnamese fighters cannot take off to intercept the bombers. They hit Phuc Yen, Kep, Hoa Lac, and other airfields with bombs and cluster munitions. They suppress enemy air power at the source. Simultaneously, EB-66 destroyer electronic warfare aircraft orbit outside North Vietnamese airspace, jamming enemy radar frequencies. These are old aircraft, converted bombers from the 1950s, now packed with electronic equipment. They radiate immense amounts of jamming energy, attempting to blind North Vietnamese acquisition radars, to degrade their command and control, to create confusion. Then come the chaff bombers, F-4. Phantoms loaded not with bombs, but with chaff dispensers. They fly corridors ahead of the B-52s, dropping clouds of aluminum strips. These strips create false radar returns, turning enemy screens into a blizzard of contacts. The idea is that the B-52s will fly through these chaff corridors, hidden in the electronic clutter. The chaff dispensers release millions of strips, each one cut to a specific length to reflect certain radar frequencies. When the chaff blooms, it creates a cloud 60 miles long and 5 to 7 miles wide. The corridors overlap, creating multiple paths the bombers can take. Then come the wild weasels, F-105G, Thunder Chiefs and F-4E Phantoms equipped with radar homing missiles and specially trained crews. Their mission is perhaps the most dangerous of all: hunt SAM sites. They fly into heavily defended areas, deliberately provoking SAM batteries to activate their radars. When a Fansong fire control radar comes on, the wild weasel crews detect it, locate it, and attack it with AGM-45 Shrike or AGM-78 Standard Arm missiles. These are anti-radiation missiles that home in on radar emissions. Launch one at an active SAM radar, and it will follow the beam right down to the transmitter. But it takes courage to fly Wild Weasel missions. You are deliberately making yourself a target. You fly low. You go after the most heavily defended sites. The SAM operators know what you are doing and try to ambush you, turning on their radars just long enough to launch a missile, then shutting down before you can fire back. It is a deadly cat-and-mouse game played at Mach 1. One Wild Weasel crew, Captain Dave Waldrop and his electronic warfare officer Captain Tom Wood, flew 5 missions over Hanoi during Linebacker 2. On their 3rd mission, they were tracking a SAM site when the enemy radar locked on. Wood detected it immediately. "We have uplink, we have missile launch." Waldrop rolled inverted, pulled hard, and dove for the deck, while Wood fired a Shrike missile. The SAM missed by feet. The Shrike hit the radar van and silenced it. But there were other SAM sites, other radars, other missiles. Waldrop and Wood survived all 5 missions, but their aircraft came back riddled with shrapnel holes every time. Supporting the Wild Weasels are strike aircraft, more F-4, Phantoms loaded with cluster bombs and Rockeye anti-armor weapons. When a Wild Weasel locates a SAM site, the strike aircraft follow up, plastering the area with bomblets designed to destroy the launchers, the support vehicles, the crew. Many SAM sites are destroyed this way during Linebacker 2, but many more survive. There are too many sites, too many missiles. The Wild Weasels and strike aircraft do what they can, but they cannot suppress everything. Above all of this, fly the MiG combat air patrols, F-4 Phantoms armed with Sparrow and Sidewinder air-to-air missiles. Their job is to protect the bombers from North Vietnamese fighters. They set up barriers between the fighters and the strike package. If MiGs take off and try to intercept the B-52s, the MiG cap fighters engage them, forcing them to fight or run. The North Vietnamese are cautious about sending up fighters. They know the Americans have hundreds of fighters orbiting. They know the odds. MiGs do occasionally intercept the bombers. That is how the 2 tail gunners got their kills. But most of the time, the MiGs stay on the ground or orbit at a distance, unwilling to commit. Then there are the tankers, KC-135 Stratotankers, flying racetracks over the South China Sea and over Thailand, refueling the fighters and bombers. A B-52 flying from Guam must refuel twice, once on the way in, once on the way out. The tankers are like gas stations in the sky, each one carrying over 200,000 pounds of fuel, enough to service multiple aircraft. They are unarmed, vulnerable. If enemy fighters ever got past the defenses and reached the tankers, it would be a massacre, but they never do. The tankers fly their missions in relative safety, a tedious but critical role. And finally, orbiting well behind the lines, are the rescue forces. HC-130 command planes coordinate search and rescue efforts. HH-53 Jolly Green Giant helicopters stand ready to dash into North Vietnam to pick up downed crews. A-1 Sky Raider attack planes, slow but heavily armed, provide cover for the helicopters. The rescue forces saved 26 American airmen during Linebacker 2, pulling them from crash sites, from rivers, from villages. But they cannot save everyone. Some crash sites are too deep in enemy territory. Some crews are captured before the rescue forces arrive. Some do not survive the crashes. All of these aircraft, all of these missions, are coordinated down to the minute. The timing has to be perfect. The F-111s hit the airfields at exactly 7 p.m. The EB-66 start jamming at 7:01. The chaff bombers drop their loads at 7:05. The Wild Weasels go in at 7:10. The B-52s arrive at 7:30. Any deviation from the schedule creates gaps in the coverage, creates vulnerabilities, gets people killed. The planning for each night's mission takes hours. Maps covered with routes and timings. Frequencies assigned for radios. Tanker rendezvous points calculated. Rescue helicopter. Positions plotted. Everything has to mesh. And it does, night after night. A testament to the professionalism of the planners and the skill of the crews. This is total war in the air. Not individual aircraft flying solo missions, but a symphony of destruction, hundreds of aircraft working together toward a common goal. The North Vietnamese have never seen anything like it. No one has seen anything like it since World War II. And it is overwhelming, for a while anyway. December 25th, 1972, Christmas Day. At Andersen Air Force Base on Guam and Utapao in Thailand, the B-52s sit silent on the flight line. For the first time in 7 days, they are not loading bombs. They are not fueling aircraft. They are not sending young men off to die over Hanoi. It is a stand down, a pause, officially for Christmas. But everyone knows the real reason. Strategic Air Command needs time to figure out what went wrong and how to fix it before they lose the entire bomber force. The crews spend Christmas as best they can. Some write letters home, some attend religious services, some drink, some sleep. The first real rest they have had in a week. But mostly they think about the friends who are not there, the empty bunks, the aircraft that did not come back. 15 B-52s lost so far. 15. And hundreds of combat missions still to fly. At SAC headquarters in Omaha and at 8th Air Force headquarters on Guam, senior officers are locked in emergency planning sessions. The first week of Linebacker 2 has been, by any measure, a near disaster. The losses are unsustainable. The tactics have failed. If operations continue as planned, the B-52 force could be effectively destroyed within days. But something else has happened, something the planners did not anticipate. The pause, meant as a gesture of goodwill, a signal that America is willing to negotiate, is being interpreted by the North Vietnamese as a sign of weakness, as proof that the bombing campaign is failing, that American will is cracking. While the Americans rest, North Vietnamese work crews are frantically transporting SAMs from storage depots to launch sites. They are restocking, preparing for the inevitable resumption of bombing. They are getting ready to kill more Americans. This will prove to be a critical mistake on their part, because when the bombing resumes, it will be very different from what came before. The planners identify the problems. The tactics are too predictable. The routes are repetitive. The post-target turns expose the aircraft to fire. The timing is too regular. The North Vietnamese have figured out the pattern and are exploiting it ruthlessly. The solutions vary everything. Multiple approach routes, different altitudes, staggered timing. Compress the attacks into shorter time windows, giving the North Vietnamese less time to react. And most critically, eliminate or modify the post-target turns. Let the bombers fly straight through the target area, exiting on the far side rather than turning back into the defenses. There is resistance to these changes. SAC doctrine has been built over decades. Changing it on the fly in the middle of combat is risky, but the alternative is losing the campaign, losing aircraft, losing men. The resistance crumbles. The new tactics are approved. There is one more change, and it is perhaps the most important. Give operational control to the commanders who have been fighting this war. Not SAC headquarters in Omaha. Not planners thousands of miles away who have never seen combat. Give control to the 8th Air Force staff on Guam, to the men who understand the threat, who listen to the crews, who can adapt quickly. This transfer of authority happens quietly, without official fanfare, but it changes everything. On the afternoon of December 26th, as crews are being briefed for the resumption of operations, they notice immediate differences. The targets are different, the routes are different, the approaches are different, and when the intelligence officer explains the new tactics, there is audible relief in the briefing room. Finally, someone is listening. That night, Day 8 begins, and it is a completely different war. December 26th, Night 8. 78 B-52s take off from Guam and Thailand. But tonight, they are not approaching Hanoi from the northeast like before. They are coming from multiple directions, some from the northwest, some from the southwest, some from due west. The North Vietnamese Air Defense Network, which has been positioned to cover the approaches used in the first week, is suddenly facing threats from unexpected directions. The altitudes vary. Some aircraft fly at 33,000 feet, others at 35,000, others at 37,000. The SAM operators, who have been calculating firing solutions based on predictable altitudes, suddenly have to adjust on the fly. The timing is compressed. Instead of waves arriving hours apart, giving the defenders time to rest and reposition, the bombers arrive in rapid succession. 30 minutes between waves instead of 3 hours. The SAM batteries barely have time to reload between attacks, and the post-target turns are gone. When a bomber drops its payload, it continues straight ahead, exiting the target area on the opposite side from which it entered. This keeps the jammers pointed at the enemy radars, keeps the aircraft in formation, maintains speed, minimizes vulnerability. The results are immediate and dramatic. The North Vietnamese fire missiles, lots of them, but they are having trouble acquiring targets. The bombers are not where they expect them to be. The tracking radars are being jammed effectively now that the bombers are not turning away. Missiles streak into the sky and detonate harmlessly, unable to find targets. Not a single B-52 is lost on night 8. 0. After 6 bombers lost 2 nights ago, 0 tonight. The crews can hardly believe it. They hit their targets, important targets, SAM storage facilities this time, and fly home. All of them. Night 9, December 27th. 60 bombers strike Hanoi again. Multiple routes, varied altitudes, compressed timing. Again, 0 losses. The North Vietnamese fire missiles, but they are firing blind, salvoing into empty air, wasting their ammunition. Night 10, December 28th. 60 bombers, same new tactics. Now the attackers are deliberately targeting SAM storage sites and assembly facilities, the places where the missiles are kept and prepared for use. The North Vietnamese have hundreds of SA-2s in storage, but they need time to prepare them for launch, time to transport them to launch sites. If those storage facilities are destroyed, the supply of missiles dries up, and that is exactly what happens. 2 major SAM storage sites are obliterated on night 10. Hundreds of missiles are destroyed in secondary explosions. Massive fireballs light up the Hanoi sky as missile fuel and warheads detonate. On night 10, 2 B-52s are lost. But both are hit during the initial approach before the major tactical changes take full effect. And critically, the loss rate has dropped from 7% to less than 2%. This is sustainable. This is manageable. Night 11, December 29th. The final night of Operation Linebacker 2. 60 B-52s strike targets around Hanoi for the last time. Storage facilities, rail yards, whatever is left of North Vietnam's logistics infrastructure. The defenses are noticeably weaker now. Fewer SAM launches, fewer missiles in the air. The North Vietnamese are running out. They have perhaps 200 missiles left out of the 800 they started with. And they are rationing them, saving them, because they do not know when the bombing will stop. As the final wave of bombers withdraws, pulling away from Hanoi into the darkness, the air defense batteries fall silent. Not because they choose to stop firing, but because they have nothing left to fire. The missile magazines are empty. When the last B-52 lands at Utah POW at dawn on December 30th, Operation Linebacker 2 is over. 11 days, 729 sorties, 15,237 tons of bombs dropped by B-52s alone, another 5,000 tons by tactical aircraft, over 20,000 tons total, 15 B-52s lost, 2 F-111s, 2 F-4s, 2 A-7s, 2 A-6, 1 RA-5C, 1 HH-53 helicopter, 26 aircraft in all, 92 American airmen killed or missing, 33 prisoners of war, 26 rescued. North Vietnamese casualties. Estimates vary wildly. The North Vietnamese claim 1,600 civilians killed. The actual number is unknown, but is certainly in the thousands. Military casualties are even harder to estimate. Hundreds, possibly thousands killed in the bombing. SAM crews, anti-aircraft gunners, command personnel. The material damage is staggering. Every major rail yard in the Hanoi-Haiphong area is destroyed or severely damaged. 80% of North Vietnam's electrical generating capacity is gone. 2/3 of the SAM storage inventory is destroyed. All major military facilities have been hit. The port of Haiphong is unusable, blocked by aerial mines and littered with bomb damage. North Vietnam's ability to wage war has been crippled. But has it worked? Has the bombing forced North Vietnam back to the negotiating table? To understand what Linebacker 2 accomplished, we need to see it from the North Vietnamese perspective, because in Hanoi, this battle looked very different. For the North Vietnamese people, the 11 days of bombing were a nightmare beyond imagination. Night after night, The sirens wailed. Night after night, they huddled in shelters while the earth shook from explosions. The bombing was unlike anything they had experienced before, and they had experienced 7 years of war. One survivor later recalled, "When the B-52s came, you could hear them before you saw them, a sound like thunder that would not stop. Then the bombs would fall, not one or two, hundreds. The ground would shake, buildings would collapse. The noise was so loud you could not think. You could only pray that the next bomb would not have your name on it." But alongside the terror was defiance. North Vietnamese leaders had spent years preparing their population for this. They had built bomb shelters under every building. They had dispersed their industry. They had stockpiled supplies. And they had instilled a fierce determination to resist American bombing no matter how heavy it became. The propaganda was relentless. We are winning. The Americans are desperate. They are trying to bomb us into submission because they are losing on the ground. If we hold firm, they will give up. They always give up eventually. And there was truth to this. By December 1972, North Vietnam was exhausted. The Easter offensive had failed. Their army had suffered terrible losses. Their supply lines were disrupted. Their economy was in ruins. They needed a settlement as badly as the Americans did, maybe more. But they also understood psychology. They understood that domestic pressure in America was immense, that Congress would likely cut off funding for the war when it reconvened in January, that Nixon was running out of time. If they could just hold out a few more weeks, the Americans would have to accept any deal, no matter how unfavorable. So, they fought. The air defense forces fought with everything they had. The SAM crews worked around the clock, firing missiles, moving launchers, trying to stop the bombers. They knew they were facing the most powerful air force in the world. They knew the odds were against them. They fought anyway. And they had help. Soviet technicians were present at many SAM sites, not officially, but everyone knew they were there. They advised. They trained. Some probably fired missiles themselves, though this was never officially acknowledged. The Russians were deeply invested in this battle. They wanted to prove that Soviet air defense systems could stop American strategic bombers. They wanted the propaganda victory. They wanted the data. For the first few nights, it seemed like they were winning. 3 B-52s shot down on night 1, 0 on night 2, but only by luck, 6 on night 3. The tactics the Americans were using were suicidal, predictable routes, predictable timing, those post-target turns that exposed the aircraft to fire. It was almost too easy. But then the Americans changed. After the Christmas pause, suddenly the bombers were coming from different directions, at different altitudes, at different times. The post-target turns were gone. The tactics that had worked so well in the first week stopped working. Missiles were being wasted, fired at ghosts, at chaff clouds, at empty air. And then the Americans started hitting the SAM storage sites, the depots where hundreds of missiles were stockpiled. On night 10, 2 major depots were destroyed. Massive explosions, hundreds of missiles gone in seconds. The supply that was supposed to last for months was suddenly down to days. By night 11, the SAM batteries were rationing ammunition. Commanders were ordered to fire only at confirmed targets, only at B-52s, save the missiles, make every shot count. But there were not enough missiles left. The inventory was exhausted, and then, as suddenly as it started, the bombing stopped. The B-52s withdrew. The skies were silent. Had the Americans run out of bombs? Had domestic pressure forced Nixon to stop? Had the campaign failed? None of the above. The truth was simpler and more pragmatic. North Vietnam's leadership had decided to resume negotiations, not because they were beaten, they would never admit defeat, but because they had achieved what they needed politically, and continuing to resist risked losing everything. On December 26th, even as the bombing continued, Le Duan, the General Secretary of the Communist Party and the real power in North Vietnam, sent a message to Washington. "We are willing to resume talks. Name a date." Nixon, who had been waiting for exactly this signal, immediately proposed January 2nd, 1973. The North Vietnamese agreed. The bombing continued for 3 more days until December 29th to maintain pressure. Then it stopped. On January 8th, talks resumed in Paris. On January 23rd, an agreement was reached. On January 27th, the Paris Peace Accords were signed. America's war in Vietnam was officially over. The human cost of Operation Linebacker 2 cannot be measured simply in numbers, but the numbers are staggering enough. American losses: 92 killed or missing in action, 33 prisoners of war, 26 rescued. That is 151 American airmen killed, captured, or rescued. Out of the thousands who flew these missions, these are B-52 crews, F-4 crews, F-111 crews, F-105 Wild Weasel crews, helicopter rescue crews, each one of them a trained professional, each one of them with a family waiting at home. Consider the B-52 crews for a moment. These are not 20-year-old infantry grunts fresh out of basic training. These are officers, captains, majors, lieutenant colonels, men in their late 20s, 30s, early 40s, many of them married, many with children. They have college educations, years of training, thousands of hours of flight time. They are the best of the best, and 15 bomber crews were lost. That is over 100 highly trained airmen killed or captured. For the families, the waiting was agony. When a bomber went down, the Air Force did not immediately notify next of kin. They waited to see who was rescued, who was captured, who was confirmed dead. This could take days. Wives and parents spent Christmas week wondering if their husband or son was alive. Some got good news. He was rescued. He is safe. Some got terrible news. Missing in action, presumed dead. Some got news that was neither good nor terrible. Prisoner of war. Alive, but captive in North Vietnam. The prisoners spent months in captivity. Some were held at the Hanoi Hilton, the notorious prison where John McCain and others had been held for years. They were interrogated. Some were tortured. Some were paraded before cameras for propaganda purposes. When they were finally released after the peace agreement, they were different men, thinner, harder, marked by the experience in ways that would never fully heal. North Vietnamese casualties were much higher. The government in Hanoi claimed 1,624 civilians were killed. This is almost certainly an underestimate. Independent estimates range from 2,000 to 5,000 civilian dead. Many more wounded. Entire neighborhoods in Hanoi were destroyed. The Bach Mai hospital bombing killed 28 hospital workers and an unknown number of patients. Apartment buildings collapsed. Bomb shelters took direct hits. People died by the hundreds. Military casualties are harder to estimate. Hundreds of SAM operators were killed in American strikes on missile sites. Anti-aircraft gun crews were obliterated by cluster bombs and napalm. Support personnel died when supply depots and command posts were hit. The total is unknown, but it is substantial. The material destruction was immense. Hanoi's power grid was destroyed. Rail transportation was paralyzed. Factories were leveled. Warehouses burned. The port of Haiphong was wrecked. North Vietnam's industrial capacity, such as it was, ceased to exist. The country was set back years economically, but for all the destruction, for all the death, the question remains, was it worth it? Did Operation Linebacker 2 accomplish its objectives? The answer depends on who you ask, and the debate has raged for 50 years. The official American position, articulated by Nixon and Kissinger, was unambiguous. Yes, it worked. The bombing forced North Vietnam back to the negotiating table. It compelled them to sign an agreement that allowed the United States to withdraw with honor. Mission accomplished. Henry Kissinger later said, with a touch of dark humor, "We bombed the North Vietnamese into accepting our concessions." This is telling, because the agreement signed in January 1973 was essentially identical to the agreement that had been on the table in October 1972. The same terms, the same provisions, the same outcome. All that changed was that 1,200 more Americans died in the interval, including the 92 lost in Linebacker 2, and thousands of Vietnamese died, all to reach an agreement that was already available 3 months earlier. So, what changed? Why did North Vietnam, which had walked away from the October agreement, suddenly agree to virtually the same terms in January? Was it the bombing, or was it something else? Historians have debated this endlessly. Some argue that the bombing was decisive, that it shattered North Vietnam's will to continue fighting, that it demonstrated American resolve and forced Hanoi to realize they could not outlast the United States. This is the Strategic Air Command narrative. This is what the Air Force taught in its schools for decades. This is the official story. But other historians are skeptical. They point out that North Vietnam's leadership had already decided to make peace before Linebacker 2 began. Le Duan, the real decision-maker in Hanoi, understood that Nixon had a narrow window to conclude the war before the new Democratic Congress took power in January. Duan calculated that it was better to sign an agreement now, while Nixon still had leverage, than to wait and risk getting worse terms later. The bombing, in this interpretation, was not the cause of the agreement. It was a sideshow, an expensive, destructive sideshow that killed thousands and accomplished nothing that diplomacy could not have achieved. Then there is the Vietnamese perspective. In Hanoi, Linebacker 2 is not remembered as a defeat. It is remembered as a victory, the Dien Bien Phu in the air, they called it. A reference to the battle in 1954 where the Vietnamese defeated the French. 15 B-52s shot down, the mighty American Air Force bloodied, the largest bombing campaign since World War II thrown at a small country. And that country still standing, still defiant, still negotiating from strength. In Vietnamese propaganda, this is a triumph. And there is truth to this. North Vietnam did not surrender. It did not capitulate. It signed an agreement that allowed American forces to leave while North Vietnamese forces stayed in South Vietnam. And 3 years later, in 1975, those forces conquered South Vietnam and unified the country under communist rule. In the long run, North Vietnam won the war. So how can Linebacker 2 be called a success? The answer is that wars are complicated. Victories are ambiguous. Success is relative. From the American perspective, Linebacker 2 achieved its immediate objective. It got the United States out of Vietnam with a peace agreement that saved face. It was not the peace America wanted, South Vietnam, independent and secure. But it was the peace America needed, an agreement that allowed withdrawal without outright defeat. From the North Vietnamese perspective, Linebacker 2 was a brutal ordeal that they survived. They took everything the Americans could throw at them and remained standing. They maintained their position in the South. They got the Americans to leave. 3 years later, they completed their conquest. Mission accomplished. Both sides claimed victory. Both sides were partly right. Amidst the strategic debates and historical controversies, there are the individual stories, the men who flew these missions, the men who fought in the skies over Hanoi. Their courage deserves to be remembered. Staff Sergeant Samuel Turner was the tail gunner on Brown 03, a B-52D from U Tapao. On Night 1, December 18th, as his aircraft approached the target, Turner spotted a MiG-21 interceptor closing from behind. The North Vietnamese pilot was trying to get into firing position, coming in fast, probably intending to fire a missile or strafe with cannon fire. Turner did not hesitate. He swiveled his 450 caliber machine guns, got a lock, and fired. Tracers streaked through the darkness. The MiG took hits. Smoke poured from the engine. The North Vietnamese pilot ejected. Turner became the first B-52 tail gunner in history to shoot down a MiG in combat. It would not be the last. On Night 7, December 24th, Airman First Class Albert Moore was the gunner on Ruby 03. During the bomb run, a MiG-21 made a firing pass. Moore engaged, tracers filling the sky, and the MiG broke apart. The pilot ejected. Another kill. Another testament to the defensive capabilities of the B-52's tail guns. Captain John Mize was the pilot of Ash-2, a B-52D that had already been hit by enemy fire on 2 previous missions. On Night 9, December 27th, Ash-2 took another hit. A SAM detonated close enough to wound every crew member. Shrapnel tore through the aircraft. Systems failed. The bomber was dying. Mize, bleeding from multiple wounds, fought the controls. The aircraft was barely flyable. He could have bailed out immediately, saved himself. Instead, he stayed at the controls, nursing the crippled bomber west, away from North Vietnam, toward Laos, toward friendly territory. He held it steady while the rest of his crew bailed out one by one, waiting until the last man was clear before finally ejecting himself. All 6 crew members survived because Mize refused to abandon them. For this act of heroism, he was awarded the Air Force Cross. the service's second highest decoration for valor. Then there are the Wild Weasel crews, the F-105G and F-4 aircraft that flew ahead of the bombers, hunting SAM sites, attacking radars, drawing fire to protect the bombers. This was perhaps the most dangerous mission of all. You deliberately made yourself a target. You flew low. You went after the most heavily defended sites. You provoked the enemy into firing at you so that you could locate them and kill them. Wild Weasel crews had a dark motto. First in, last out, you gotta be shitting me. First in, because they arrived before the bombers to suppress defenses. Last out, because they stayed over the target area while the bombers escaped, making sure the SAM sites stayed suppressed. And you gotta be shitting me, because the whole concept seemed insane, deliberately attracting missiles so you can shoot the launchers. But it worked. Wild Weasel crews destroyed or suppressed dozens of SAM sites during Linebacker 2. They drew fire away from the bombers, they saved lives, and they paid a price. Several Wild Weasel aircraft were shot down, their crews killed or captured. There are also the rescue crews, the men who flew HH-53 Jolly Green Giant helicopters into North Vietnam to pick up downed airmen. This was incredibly dangerous work, flying a slow, vulnerable helicopter into heavily defended territory, landing under fire, extracting survivors while being shot at. It took nerves of steel. One HH-53 was shot down during a rescue attempt, killing the crew. But other rescue missions succeeded, plucking airmen from the jungle, from rivers, from rice paddies, sometimes within sight of North Vietnamese forces. 26 American airmen were rescued during Linebacker 2, pulled from certain death or captivity by these helicopter crews who risked everything to bring them home. And we must remember the prisoners, the men who were shot down and captured, who spent months in North Vietnamese prisons before being released after the peace agreement. They were interrogated, pressured to make propaganda statements. Some were tortured. All endured psychological abuse, isolation, uncertainty. When they were finally freed in Operation Homecoming in February and March 1973, they were heroes. But they were also changed men, marked by experiences that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. John McCain, who had been a prisoner since 1967, later said that the Christmas bombing saved his life and the lives of all the prisoners. By December 1972, the prisoners were at their lowest point. Many were seriously ill. Some were near death. They had given up hope. But when the bombs started falling on Hanoi, when the prison walls shook from the explosions, they knew. America had not forgotten them. America was still fighting, and suddenly they had hope again. They endured, and when the peace agreement was signed, they came home. Operation Linebacker 2 left a legacy that extends far beyond the Vietnam War. It changed how America thought about air power. It influenced military doctrine. It shaped the way future wars would be fought. The most obvious lesson: strategic bombing can work, but only if it is applied decisively. The gradual limited bombing campaigns of Rolling Thunder and early Linebacker achieved little at great cost. But when Nixon finally unleashed the B-52s with minimal restrictions, the results were dramatic. 11 days of intensive bombing accomplished more than years of limited strikes. The lesson seemed clear. If you are going to bomb, bomb hard. Shock and awe, overwhelming force. Do not give the enemy time to adapt. This lesson influenced American military planning for decades. The Gulf War in 1991 began with an intensive air campaign designed to destroy Iraq's military infrastructure in days rather than months. The Iraq War in 2003 followed a similar pattern. The lesson of Linebacker 2: go in hard and fast. But there was another lesson, one that SAC was reluctant to acknowledge. Flexibility matters. The rigid, predictable tactics of the first week nearly led to disaster. The losses were unsustainable. It was only when operational commanders were given freedom to adapt, to change tactics, to try new approaches, that the campaign succeeded. This lesson, that you need to give tactical commanders authority to make decisions based on battlefield conditions, would influence the entire Air Force. Linebacker 2 also demonstrated the effectiveness of precision-guided munitions. While the B-52s dropped conventional dumb bombs, tactical aircraft used laser-guided bombs and other precision weapons to devastating effect. These weapons proved far more accurate than conventional bombs, allowing smaller strikes to achieve greater results. General John Vogt, commander of 7th Air Force, said that one precision-guided bomb was worth 100 conventional bombs. This accelerated the development and deployment of precision weapons that would define air warfare in the decades to come. The operation also exposed weaknesses in electronic warfare. The B-52's defensive systems worked, but only when properly employed. The jammers were most effective when aircraft stayed in formation. The lesson? Electronic warfare is critical, but it requires proper tactics and training. This led to improved systems and better training for electronic warfare officers throughout the Air Force. For Strategic Air Command, Linebacker 2 was both validation and wake-up call. Validation because the B-52, despite being designed in the 1940s and built in the 50s, proved it could still be an effective weapon. Wake-up call because the institution had become complacent, focused on nuclear war to the exclusion of conventional operations. After Linebacker 2, SAC would diversify its training and update its doctrine. Politically, the operation was controversial then, and it remains controversial now. Critics argued and continue to argue that the bombing was unnecessary, that the same peace agreement could have been achieved without the death and destruction. They point to the civilian casualties, the international condemnation, the damage to America's reputation. They say it was a war crime dressed up as strategy. Supporters counter that the bombing was necessary to force North Vietnam to negotiate in good faith, that it saved American lives by ending the war quickly, that it demonstrated American resolve and prevented a worse outcome. They point to the prisoners who were freed, the troops who came home, the peace that was achieved. Both sides have valid points. The truth, as usual, is complicated. What is certain is that Operation Linebacker 2 marked the end of America's combat role in Vietnam. After January 1973, there would be no more major operations, no more bombing campaigns. American forces withdrew over the next 2 months. The prisoners came home. The war for America was over. The legacy for Vietnam is equally complex. The country had suffered terribly, decades of war, hundreds of thousands dead, the economy destroyed, the land scarred by bombs and chemicals. But Vietnam had survived. It had outlasted the French, the Americans, the South Vietnamese government, and in 1975, it would achieve the reunification that had been its goal all along. For the airmen who flew Linebacker 2, the legacy is deeply personal. Many are proud of what they did. They believe they helped end the war. They believe they saved lives. They take pride in having flown through the most heavily defended airspace in history and survived. The annual reunions of Linebacker 2 veterans are emotional events. Old men remembering when they were young, when they were scared, when they were brave. But some carry guilt for the civilians who died, for the friends who did not come back, for participating in a war that ultimately seemed pointless when South Vietnam fell in 1975. They wonder, what was it all for? Was any of it worth it? There are no easy answers. War never provides easy answers. Closing, Thunder over Hanoi, December 29, 1972, 6:59 a.m. Hanoi time. The last B-52 of Operation Linebacker. 2 turns away from North Vietnam, heading east toward Thailand, engines roaring, crew exhausted but alive. Behind them, the sun is rising over Hanoi. Smoke rises from dozens of impact sites. The city is battered but still standing. The people are emerging from shelters, surveying the damage, beginning the work of recovery. In Washington, President Nixon receives word that North Vietnam has agreed to resume talks. He declares victory. Peace is at hand, again. On Guam and at U Tapao, ground crews service the returning bombers, patches for bullet holes, repairs for damaged systems, reloading bomb bays just in case the order comes to go. Back, but the order never comes. The war is over for the B-52s, 11 days, 729 sorties, over 20,000 tons of bombs, 15 B-52s lost, nearly 100 American airmen killed or captured, thousands of Vietnamese dead, a capital city devastated, and a peace agreement that would be signed 4 weeks later, allowing America to finally leave the war that had consumed a generation. Was it worth it? History has not provided a clear answer. The peace agreement did not last. South Vietnam fell in 1975. The prisoners came home, but so did hundreds of thousands of traumatized veterans. America had lost its first war. The country was divided. Trust in government was shattered. But for the men who flew those missions, there is a simpler truth. They did what they were ordered to do. They flew into hell, and most of them came back. They faced the most sophisticated air defenses in history and prevailed. They adapted when the tactics failed. They fought with courage and professionalism. Whatever the strategic outcome, whatever the political debates, they did their duty. In the end, Operation Linebacker 2 demonstrated both the power and the limits of air warfare. Air power alone cannot win wars, but it can achieve decisive results when properly applied. It can force nations to the negotiating table. It can destroy infrastructure and military capability. It can save lives by shortening conflicts. It can also kill innocents, destroy cities, create resentment that lasts generations. The bombs that fell on Hanoi in December 1972 achieved their military objective, but they also created images of hospitals destroyed, of civilians killed, of a small nation being carpet-bombed by a superpower that damaged America's moral standing for decades. Perhaps the ultimate lesson of Operation Linebacker 2 is this: war is a blunt instrument. Even when it works, even when it achieves its objectives, it creates costs that far exceed what anyone anticipated. The question is never whether war can be effective. The question is whether the price of victory is worth paying. For the airmen who flew through the missile-filled skies over Hanoi in December 1972, the answer is personal. They survived. Their friends did not. They did their duty. The cost was high. The outcome was ambiguous. But they were there. They know what it took. They carry that knowledge for the rest of their lives. The Christmas bombings. Operation Linebacker 2. The most intense 11 days of aerial combat since World War II. A campaign that nearly failed before it succeeded. A victory that felt like defeat. A defeat that the enemy turned into victory. A piece of history that refuses to fit neatly into any category except this. It happened, it mattered, and it cost more than anyone wanted to pay. May we learn from it. May we remember those who served. May we honor their sacrifice by working for peace, even as we prepare for war. And may we never forget the price that was paid in the skies over Hanoi during those 11 days in December 1972. For the men who were shot down and captured during Linebacker 2, the ordeal was only beginning when their parachutes deposited them in North Vietnam. Let me tell you what happened to them, because their story is an essential part of understanding the full cost of this operation. When you eject from a B-52 at 35,000 feet, you are immediately hit with problems. The air temperature at that altitude is minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit or colder. The air is too thin to breathe without supplemental oxygen. If your parachute opens immediately, you will freeze or suffocate before you reach the ground. That is why ejection seats are designed to free fall until reaching lower altitude, then automatically deploy the chute. But in combat, with the aircraft on fire, with systems failing, not everything works as designed. Some crew members tumble through the thin air, semi-conscious from hypoxia, praying that their automatic system works. Some manually deploy their chutes too early and barely make it down alive. Some die during the ejection itself, when shrapnel or fire kills them before they clear the aircraft. For those who survive the ejection and make it to the ground, the situation is immediately dire. You are deep in enemy territory. Your aircraft just dropped bombs on this country. You are wearing a flight suit with American flags on it. You are injured. Almost everyone who ejects sustains injuries from the violent forces involved. Broken bones, dislocated shoulders, back injuries. And you are alone in the dark in a country where everyone wants you dead or captured. Some crews come down in rural areas and are immediately surrounded by militia and civilians. The civilians are angry. Their homes have been bombed. Their families have been killed. They want revenge. North Vietnamese military personnel usually arrive quickly to take control, but not always quickly enough to prevent beatings. Captain Bob Certain, the navigator from Charcoal 01, shot down on night 1, came down in a village. He was immediately surrounded by dozens of people with farming implements. Hoes, shovels, bamboo poles. They beat him. He covered his head and curled into a ball while they hit him again and again. He later said, "I thought I was going to die right there. beaten to death by farmers in a rice paddy. But then soldiers arrived and pulled the crowd back. They probably saved my life, even though they were taking me prisoner. The captured airmen are usually stripped of their flight suits, valuables, and personal items. They are bound, hands behind their backs, sometimes their arms wrenched up painfully high, sometimes additional rope around their necks so that if they struggle, they choke themselves. Then they are marched or trucked to Hanoi. The journey can take hours or days. No food, little water, beatings if they slow down. Crowds gather wherever they stop, shouting, spitting, throwing rocks. The airmen are paraded through villages as trophies, as evidence that the mighty Americans are not invincible. It is psychological warfare directed at the prisoners and at the Vietnamese population. See, we can defeat them. When they finally reach Hanoi, they are taken to prison camps. The most famous is Hoa Lo Prison, called the Hanoi Hilton by American prisoners. But there are others: the Plantation, the Zoo, Alcatraz. All of them are grim places: concrete cells, little light, unsanitary conditions, rats, disease, isolation. The interrogations begin immediately. The North Vietnamese want military information. What aircraft are you flying? What are your targets? What are your tactics? What defenses do you have against missiles? How many aircraft are involved? When will the next raid come? Most American airmen are trained in the code of conduct: name, rank, service number, date of birth. Nothing more. Resist, do not cooperate. But resistance has consequences. Torture is common, not the Hollywood version with elaborate devices, but effective nonetheless. Beatings. Stress positions where you are forced to squat or kneel for hours until your muscles scream. Rope torture where your arms are bound behind your back and cranked higher and higher until the pain is unbearable and your shoulders dislocate. Sleep deprivation, withholding medical treatment, solitary confinement in tiny cells. Some men break under this treatment. They answer questions. They make propaganda statements. They appear on North Vietnamese television denouncing the war. This is not cowardice. This is human limitation. Everyone has a breaking point. The North Vietnamese are expert at finding it. But most resist as long as they can. They give false information. They delay. They endure the torture until they physically cannot continue. Then they give minimum information and stop. The honor code among the prisoners is clear. Resist until resistance becomes physically impossible, then give them nothing useful. The prisoners develop communication systems, tapping on walls in a code based on a 5x5 letter grid, clearing throats in patterns to send messages during the rare times they are together. Notes hidden in laundry, in food bowls, anywhere they can pass information undetected. They organize themselves, maintain military structure even in captivity, follow orders from senior officers even when they cannot see or speak to each other directly. And they wait. They endure. They wonder if America has forgotten them. The longer-term prisoners, the ones who have been captive since the mid-1960s, are in terrible condition by December 1972. John McCain has been a prisoner since October 1967. His arms were broken during ejection, and he has never received proper medical treatment. He is chronically malnourished, sick, in constant pain. Many other prisoners are similarly damaged, missing teeth from beatings, permanent injuries from torture, tropical diseases from the unsanitary conditions. But then, on the night of December 18th, they hear the bombs. The Hanoi Hilton shakes. The walls vibrate. Explosions in the distance, then closer, then very close. The whole building shakes so hard that plaster falls from the ceiling. The prisoners cannot see what is happening outside their cells, but they can hear it. And they know what it means. B-52s. Heavy bombers. America has not forgotten. America is hitting Hanoi harder than ever before. McCain later said, "When those bombs hit, when the building shook, we cheered. We were in our cells. We could not see each other, but we cheered. Some of us thought they had dropped nuclear weapons. We did not care. We knew that finally, America was fighting to win. And we knew that meant we might go home." The bombing terrifies the guards as much as it does the prisoners, maybe more, because the prisoners want the bombs to keep falling. The guards just want to survive. When a particularly close explosion rocks the prison, guards run for cover, leaving their posts, forgetting about the prisoners for precious minutes while they hide. The prisoners used this time to communicate, to pass information, to organize. The shared experience of the bombing, the shared fear and exhilaration, bonds them. They know something big is happening. They know this might be the end of the war. They endure. When the bombing stops after 11 days, the prisoners are disappointed. They wanted it to continue. They wanted America to keep bombing until North Vietnam surrendered. But within weeks, they start hearing rumors, negotiations, a possible agreement, prisoner release, and then it happens. In February and March 1973, Operation Homecoming brings the prisoners home. 591 Americans are released. They fly to Clark Air Base in the Philippines, then on to the United States. They see their families for the first time in years. Some have been prisoners for 7 or 8 years. Some do not recognize their own children, who have grown up in their absence. The prisoners released after Linebacker 2 have been captive for only a few months. But those months were brutal. They bear the marks of torture, of beatings, of starvation rations. They are lucky compared to the long-term prisoners, but they still carry scars, and they all credit the Christmas bombing with bringing them home. Whether that is true strategically is debatable, but psychologically it is absolutely true. The bombing gave them hope. It gave them strength to endure. It convinced them that America had not abandoned them. And when the peace agreement was signed and they were released, they knew that Linebacker 2 had played a role. Captain Bob Surton, navigator on the first B-52 shot down, spent over a month in captivity before being released. He later said, "Those were the worst weeks of my life. Worse than the shoot-down. Worse than the beatings. The not knowing if anyone cared. But when the bombs fell, I knew. America cared. America was fighting for us. That knowledge sustained me. It kept me alive." Let me take you through the final nights of Linebacker 2 in detail. Because after the tactical changes, the operation became a masterclass in adaptive warfare. Night 8 through Night 11 saw the bombers employ completely different tactics, and the results were stunning. Night 8, December 26th. The bombers returned to Hanoi after the Christmas stand-down, but nothing is the same. The planners have divided the target list into multiple groups and assigned different approaches to each. Cell Red approaches from the northwest at 33,000 feet. Cell Blue comes from the southwest at 35,000. Cell Green from due west at 37,000. Simultaneously, the timing is compressed, where before the waves were spaced 3 to 4 hours apart, now they are coming in 30-minute intervals. Wave 1 hits at 8 p.m., Wave 2 at 8:30, Wave 3 at 9. The North Vietnamese air defense commanders, used to having hours to reposition their forces between waves, suddenly have no time. They fire at Wave 1, and before they can reload, Wave 2 is overhead. They fire at Wave 2, and Wave 3 arrives before they are ready. The targets include SAM storage facilities. This is critical. The planners have finally realized that the way to defeat the SAM threat is not just to destroy launchers, those can be replaced, but to destroy the missiles themselves. Hit the storage depots, hit the assembly facilities, cut off the supply. 2 major SAM storage sites are hit on Night 8. At the first site, near Hanoi's outskirts, 36 500-pound bombs impact in rapid succession. Secondary explosions follow, massive fireballs as dozens of SA-2 missiles detonate. The entire facility is obliterated. Hundreds of missiles that would have been used against American aircraft are destroyed in seconds. At the second site, the results are even more dramatic. A stick of bombs detonates directly on top of a storage bunker containing assembled missiles, ready to be transported to launch sites. The resulting explosion is visible from Hanoi, a mushroom cloud rising thousands of feet, illuminating the night sky. Witnesses on the ground think a nuclear weapon has been used. It is not nuclear, just conventional explosives and missile fuel, creating a hellish conflagration. The North Vietnamese fire back, of course. Over 100 SAMs are launched on Night 8, but they are firing at ghosts, at chaff clouds, at jamming signals. The tracking radars cannot get solid locks. The missiles climb into the sky, reach their programmed altitude, detonate, and hit nothing. The B-52s, flying through on varied routes at different altitudes, are much harder targets now. Result: 0 B-52 losses. Every aircraft returns safely. The crews are jubilant. The tactics work. Finally, Finally, the tactics work. Night 9, December 27th. 60 bombers strike Hanoi again. More SAM storage sites, more rail yards, more varied approaches and compressed timing. The North Vietnamese are getting desperate now. They fire missiles in salvos of 6 and 8, hoping that sheer volume will overwhelm the defenses. But they are running low on ammunition. Every salvo depletes their inventory. Every miss is a missile they cannot replace. And the Americans are learning to read the patterns. Electronic warfare officers study the enemy tactics, figure out how the SAM operators are trying to track through the jamming, and adjust their countermeasures accordingly. It becomes a chess match, move and counter-move. But the Americans have more pieces on the board. 2 B-52s are hit on night 9. Both take damage but make it home. One lands with 3 of 8 engines out, streaming fuel, the crew not sure if they will make it to the runway. But they do. They land, they survive, the aircraft is repaired and flies again. Night 10, December 28th. The penultimate night, 60 bombers again. By now the pattern is clear. The North Vietnamese are losing. They still have SAM sites operational. They still have missiles. But their tracking and coordination are degraded. The command and control network has been damaged by bombing. The radar sites have been suppressed by wild weasels. The missile inventory is depleted. They are fighting blind and running out of ammunition. The final major SAM depot is hit on night 10. This one is underground, hardened against bombing, but the planners assign multiple cells to hit it with concentrated strikes. Over 100 bombs fall in a 30-second period, saturating the area, penetrating the hardened structure, detonating inside. The entire depot collapses, burying hundreds of missiles under tons of rubble. Even if the missiles are not destroyed, they are inaccessible. Result: 0 B-52 losses. Again. For 3 consecutive nights, not a single bomber has been shot down. The loss rate has dropped from 7% to 0. The tactics have gone from suicidal to survivable. Night 11, December 29th. The final night? 60 bombers strike one last time. The targets are whatever is left. Storage facilities, rail yards, power plants. The message is clear. We can do this forever. We can come back night after night until there is nothing left to bomb. The North Vietnamese barely respond. They fire perhaps 50 SAMs, half what they were firing at the beginning. Many of the missiles appear to be unguided, launched in desperation without proper radar tracking. They climb, they tumble, they detonate without finding targets. The missile magazines are empty. The war is over. The last B-52, call sign Ebony 01, drops its bombs on a rail yard and turns for home at 6:45 a.m. Hanoi time. The sun is rising. Smoke from 11 nights of bombing hangs over the city. And in Washington, word has arrived. North Vietnam will return to the negotiating table. They will sign an agreement. They will stop fighting. At 6:59 a.m., exactly at 7 o'clock Washington time, President Nixon officially terminates Operation Linebacker 2. The order goes out to all commands. Cease offensive operations against North Vietnam. The B-52s stand down. The fighters return to base. After 11 days, after 729 sorties, after 15 aircraft lost and nearly 100 men killed or captured, it is over. In the days and weeks that follow, both sides take stock. They count the cost, they assess the damage, they try to understand what just happened. At Strategic Air Command headquarters in Omaha, senior officers are conducting an intensive review. What went right? What went wrong? How did we lose 15 bombers in the most heavily defended airspace in history, yet still accomplish the mission? The conclusions are sobering. The first week was nearly a disaster. The tactics were wrong, the predictable routes, the unchanging altitudes, the post-target turns, all of it played into North Vietnamese hands. If not for the tactical changes on night 8, the entire campaign might have collapsed. The loss rate was unsustainable. Another week of 7% attrition would have grounded the B-52 force. But the second week vindicated air power doctrine. When properly employed, with varied tactics and competent planning, the B-52 proved nearly invulnerable. The final 3 nights saw 0 losses despite continued heavy defenses. This was what strategic bombing could be when done right. The lesson is clear but uncomfortable. Institutional rigidity, nearly cost us the war. SAC's insistence on nuclear war tactics in a conventional war environment was wrong. Only when operational control was given to commanders who understood the threat did the campaign succeed. There is also a hard truth about the B-52G models. The aircraft without advanced electronic countermeasures suffered disproportionate losses. Of the 15 B-52s shot down, 10 were Gs. The message is clear. In modern air warfare, you need modern defensive systems. Rushing unmodified aircraft into combat gets people killed. The Wild Weasel crews and strike aircraft deserve immense credit. They suppressed SAM sites. They destroyed radars. They kept the defenses off balance. Without their support, the B-52 losses would have been much higher. This validates the doctrine of integrated air operations. Bombers need fighter support, electronic warfare support, and suppression of enemy air defenses to survive. The precision-guided munitions used by tactical aircraft proved remarkably effective. Laser-guided bombs destroyed targets with accuracy that conventional bombing could not match. This technology, still relatively new in 1972, would revolutionize air warfare in the decades to come. But there are also failures to acknowledge. The Bach Mai hospital bombing was a public relations disaster. Whether the bombs went astray by accident or because the hospital was too close to a military target, the result was the same. Dead civilians, international condemnation, propaganda victory for North Vietnam. More care should have been taken to avoid such incidents. The stand down on Christmas Day, meant as a goodwill gesture, backfired. Instead of signaling American willingness to negotiate, it was interpreted as weakness. The North Vietnamese used the pause to restock their SAM sites, resulting in higher American losses when bombing resumed. The lesson: once you commit to military action, maintain pressure until your objective is achieved. In Hanoi, the reckoning is different. The North Vietnamese leadership publicly declares victory. They shot down 15 B-52s, they say. They destroyed 5 F-111s, they claim. They withstood the heaviest bombing campaign since World War II and remain standing. This is resistance. This is triumph. But privately, they know the truth. The bombing devastated their infrastructure. Every rail yard is destroyed. 80% of electrical generation capacity is gone. The port is unusable. The military depots are obliterated. More critically, they are out of missiles. The SAM inventory is exhausted. If the Americans continue bombing, there is nothing left to stop them. The North Vietnamese Politburo held an emergency meeting on December 26th, even as bombs were falling. The question was stark. Can we continue? General Van Tien Dung, the military commander, reports that air defenses are collapsing. Le Duan, the party leader, acknowledges that further resistance is futile. The decision is made: return to negotiations. Accept an agreement. Get the Americans to stop bombing. A message is sent to Washington through Soviet intermediaries. We are ready to talk. Name a date. The message arrives on December 27th. Nixon responds immediately. January 2nd. Agreed. The bombing continues for 2 more nights to maintain pressure, but the outcome is settled. North Vietnam will negotiate. The war will end. Both sides can claim victory. Both sides can save face. And the killing can stop. It has been over 50 years since Operation Linebacker 2. The veterans are old men now, in their 70s and 80s. Many have passed away. But those who remain gather occasionally at reunions, remembering, telling stories, honoring fallen friends. I spoke with several Linebacker 2 veterans for this documentary. Their memories are vivid. The terror of flying through missile fields, the relief of making it home, the guilt of surviving when others did not. These experiences shape them, define them, in ways that civilian life never could. Colonel Bill Jones, pilot of Ruby 03, the aircraft we followed earlier, is 83 now, retired from the Air Force. After 30 years of service, he lives in Florida with his wife of 55 years. When I asked him about Linebacker 2, he was quiet for a long moment before answering. Every Christmas I think about it, he said. December 1972, the Christmas bombings. That is what the press called them, and the name stuck. I flew 5 missions over Hanoi in 11 days. 5 times I came home. A lot of my friends did not. I think about them. I think about the North Vietnamese we killed, the civilians who died. I think about whether it mattered, whether we accomplished anything, and I still do not have an answer. But you did your duty, I said. We did, he agreed. We flew the missions. We followed orders. We did what our country asked. Whether it was the right thing to do, whether the war was justified, that is above my pay grade. I was a captain. I flew bombers. I did my job. That is all I can say. This sentiment is common among the veterans. They do not want to defend or condemn the war. They just want to be remembered for doing their duty under impossible circumstances. Staff Sergeant James Parker, the tail gunner on Ruby 03, had a different perspective. I was 23 years old, he told me. I joined the Air Force right out of high school, went to technical school, became a gunner, got assigned to B-52s. Next thing I know, I am sitting in the tail of a bomber over Hanoi with missiles coming up all around me. It was surreal, like a movie, except it was real and I could die. Were you scared? I asked. Terrified, he said flatly. Anyone who says they were not scared is lying. You see a SAM launch, you see that missile coming toward you, there is nothing you can do except hope it misses. Hope the jammers work. Hope today is not the day you die. Yeah, I was scared, but I did my job. That is what you do. Captain Dave Waldrop, the Wild Weasel pilot who flew 5 missions, told me, we knew we had the most dangerous job in the Air Force. Everyone knew it. Wild Weasel missions are designed to draw fire so you can kill the SAM sites. You are literally bait, but someone has to do it. If we do not suppress the SAMs, the bombers die. So, we did it. We went in first. We took the hits. We survived. Not everyone did, but we did. I asked him if he thought the operation was worth it. He gave me a wry smile. That is a political question, and I am not a politician. I am a pilot. Was it worth it militarily? Yes. We destroyed North Vietnam's ability to wage war. We forced them to negotiate. We ended the war. Strategically, it worked. Whether the peace agreement was good or bad, whether South Vietnam should have been abandoned in 1975, that is not my call. I did my part. The rest is history. The North Vietnamese perspective is equally complex. I reached out to several Vietnamese historians and former air defense personnel. Most were reluctant to speak on record, but a few shared their memories, anonymously. One former SAM operator told me, "We fought with what we had, Soviet equipment, Soviet training, but Vietnamese courage. When the B-52s came, we knew we were facing the most powerful air force in the world. We knew the odds. We fired our missiles, we did our duty, we tried to protect our country. Some nights we were lucky, some nights we were not, but we never gave up. That is what I want Americans to understand. We never gave up." A Hanoi resident who survived the bombing told me, "I was 12 years old. I remember the bombs, the noise, the fear. Every night we went to the shelter. Every night we wondered if we would live to see morning. My uncle was killed when a bomb hit his factory. My neighbor's house was destroyed. War is terrible. But we survived. We rebuilt. We moved on. That is what people do." When I asked if there was resentment toward Americans, she shook her head. That was 50 years ago. A different time, a different world. We were enemies then. We are not enemies now. The war is over. We remember, but we do not hate. Life is too short for hate. This capacity for forgiveness, for moving forward, is remarkable, but it is also pragmatic. Vietnam has a young population. Most Vietnamese today were not alive during the war. For them, it is history, not memory. They know about it, but it does not define them the way it defines the veterans. December 29th, 1972, 6:59 a.m. Hanoi time. The last B-52 of Operation Linebacker. 2 turns away from North Vietnam, heading east toward Thailand, engines roaring, crew exhausted but alive. Behind them, the sun is rising over Hanoi. Smoke rises from dozens of impact sites. The city is battered but still standing. The people are emerging from shelters, surveying the damage, beginning the work of recovery. In Washington, President Nixon receives word that North Vietnam has agreed to resume talks. He declares victory. Peace is at hand, again. On Guam and at U Ta Pao, ground crews service the returning bombers. Patches for bullet holes, repairs for damaged systems. Reloading bomb bays just in case the order comes to go back. But the order never comes. The war is over for the B-52s. 11 days. 729 sorties, over 20,000 tons of bombs, 15 B-52s lost, nearly 100 American airmen killed or captured, thousands of Vietnamese dead, a capital city devastated, and a peace agreement that would be signed 4 weeks later, allowing America to finally leave the war that had consumed a generation. Was it worth it? History has not provided a clear answer. The peace agreement did not last. South Vietnam fell in 1975. The prisoners came home, but so did hundreds of thousands of traumatized veterans. America had lost its first war. The country was divided. Trust in government was shattered. But for the men who flew those missions, there is a simpler truth. They did what they were ordered to do. They flew into hell, and most of them came back. They faced the most sophisticated air defenses in history and prevailed. They adapted when the tactics failed. They fought with courage and professionalism. Whatever the strategic outcome, whatever the political debates, they did their duty. In the end, Operation Linebacker 2 demonstrated both the power and the limits of air warfare. Air power alone cannot win wars, but it can achieve decisive results when properly applied. It can force nations to the negotiating table. It can destroy infrastructure and military capability. It can save lives by shortening conflicts. It can also kill innocents, destroy cities, create resentment that lasts generations. The bombs that fell on Hanoi in December 1972 achieved their military objective, but they also created images of hospitals destroyed, of civilians killed, of a small nation being carpet-bombed by a superpower that damaged America's moral standing for decades. Perhaps the ultimate lesson of Operation Linebacker 2 is this: war is a blunt instrument. Even when it works, even when it achieves its objectives, it creates costs that far exceed what anyone anticipated. The question is never whether war can be effective. The question is whether the price of victory is worth paying. For the airmen who flew through the missile-filled skies over Hanoi in December 1972, the answer is personal. They survived. Their friends did not. They did their duty. The cost was high. The outcome was ambiguous. But they were there. They know what it took. They carry that knowledge for the rest of their lives. The Christmas bombings. Operation Linebacker 2. The most intense 11 days of aerial combat since World War II. A campaign that nearly failed before it succeeded. A victory that felt like defeat. A defeat that the enemy turned into victory. A piece of history that refuses to fit neatly into any category except this. It happened, it mattered, and it cost more than anyone wanted to pay. May we learn from it? May we remember those who served. May we honor their sacrifice by working for peace, even as we prepare for war. And may we never forget the price that was paid in the skies over Hanoi during those 11 days in December 1972. To truly understand Operation Linebacker 2, we need to examine it from the highest strategic level. Because this was not just about tactics and aircraft. This was about two nations locked in a test of wills, and both sides were making calculations that went far beyond the skies over Hanoi. In Washington, President Nixon was facing multiple pressures. Domestically, the anti-war movement had grown to include mainstream America. The 1972 election gave him a mandate, but it was a mandate to end the war, not to continue it. Congress would reconvene in January with a Democratic majority hostile to continued involvement in Vietnam. Legislation to cut off funding for the war was inevitable. Internationally, Nixon was pursuing détente with the Soviet Union and normalization with China. Both communist powers were urging North Vietnam to make peace. Neither wanted the war to continue indefinitely, but both were watching to see if Nixon would follow through on his threats. If he blinked, if he backed down, his credibility in Moscow and Beijing would be shattered. Nixon also had to consider South Vietnam. President Thieu was refusing to sign the October agreement because he believed it sold out his country. Nixon needed Thieu's signature for the peace to be legitimate, but he also needed leverage to force Thieu to sign. The bombing of North Vietnam served dual purposes: punish Hanoi for walking away from negotiations, and demonstrate to Thieu that America still had the power to protect South Vietnam if he would just sign the agreement. Finally, there were the prisoners of war. 600 American servicemen were being held in North Vietnamese prisons. Their release was non-negotiable. Any peace agreement had to include return of all prisoners. The bombing was, in part, about applying pressure to secure their release. In Hanoi, the calculations were equally complex. North Vietnamese leaders knew they could not defeat America militarily. The United States had overwhelming military power, but they also knew that American domestic politics limited how that power could be used. Time was on their side. If they could just hold out, Congress would force an American withdrawal. Then, without American support, South Vietnam would collapse. The October Agreement had seemed acceptable because it achieved their minimum objectives: American withdrawal and allowance for North Vietnamese forces to remain in South Vietnam. But when Thieu rejected it, Hanoi saw an opportunity to extract better terms. They calculated that Nixon, under domestic pressure and facing a hostile Congress in January, would be forced to accept a worse deal rather than have no deal at all. The Christmas bombing caught them by surprise. They had not expected Nixon to escalate so dramatically. But once it started, they had to decide. Could they survive it? The answer, after the first week, seemed to be yes. They were shooting down B-52s. They were withstanding the bombing. The cities were damaged but functional. If they could endure another few weeks, Nixon would have to stop due to domestic pressure. But then came the tactical changes on Night 8. Suddenly they were not shooting down B-52s anymore. Suddenly their SAM inventory was being destroyed faster than they could replace it. By December 26th, they realized the situation had changed. If bombing continued at this intensity, with these improved American tactics, North Vietnam's air defenses would collapse within days. Once that happened, the bombing would be catastrophic and unstoppable. Le Duan, the real power in Hanoi, convened the Politburo. The debate was heated. Hardliners wanted to continue fighting. They argued that stopping now would look like surrender. But Le Duan was pragmatic. He pointed out that they had achieved their objectives. The Americans would leave, North Vietnamese forces would stay in the south, and they could always resume the war later once the Americans were gone. Why sacrifice everything for pride? The vote was close, but Le Duan prevailed. On December 26, even as bombs were falling, the decision was made: return to negotiations. A message was sent to Washington. The bombing continued for 3 more days, but the outcome was decided. This is the strategic reality of Linebacker 2. Both sides were looking for a way out. Both sides needed face-saving measures. The bombing provided that. Nixon could claim he had bombed the North into submission. Le Duan could claim North Vietnam had withstood the bombing and forced America to accept their terms. Both narratives were partly true and partly false, but both allowed the war to end, which is what both sides needed. Operation Linebacker 2 provided invaluable lessons about modern air warfare and the technology required to survive in heavily defended airspace. These lessons shaped military development for the next 50 years. First, electronic warfare proved decisive. The difference between B-52Ds with advanced jammers and B-52Gs with older equipment was stark. The Ds survived at much higher rates. This validated the massive investment in electronic countermeasures that had been ongoing since the early 60s. After Linebacker 2, the Air Force accelerated development of even more sophisticated jamming systems, leading to the advanced EW suites on modern aircraft. Second, precision-guided munitions demonstrated their value. Tactical aircraft using laser-guided bombs destroyed targets that would have required dozens of sorties with conventional bombs. The Tha Hoa Bridge, which had survived hundreds of attacks during Rolling Thunder, was finally destroyed by precision weapons during Linebacker 1. This accelerated the shift from area bombing to precision strike that defines modern air warfare. Third, suppression of enemy air defenses was shown to be critical. The Wild Weasel aircraft and their anti-radiation missiles saved countless bombers, but the tactics needed refinement. The first-generation Shrike missile had limited range, and the SAM operators learned to turn off their radars before the missile arrived. This drove development of better anti-radar missiles like the HARM, which has longer range and memory capability. Fourth, the importance of integrated operations was confirmed. No single platform could survive alone. Bombers needed fighter escort, electronic warfare support, SAM suppression, tanker support, and rescue backup. The complexity of coordinating hundreds of aircraft in a single strike package pushed development of better command and control systems, leading eventually to the AWACS and later systems. Fifth, adaptive tactics were essential. The rigid, predictable SAC tactics of the first week failed catastrophically. Only when commanders on the scene were given authority to adapt did the campaign succeed. This lesson influenced Air Force culture, pushing for more decentralized command and more authority for tactical commanders. Sixth, enemy countermeasures evolved rapidly. The North Vietnamese learned American tactics within days and adapted. They repositioned SAM sites. They concentrated fire at vulnerable points. They rationed missiles when supplies ran low. Modern adversaries will do the same. This means tactics must constantly evolve. What works today may fail tomorrow. Finally, logistics matter enormously. North Vietnam ran out of missiles. This was the decisive factor in the final days. No matter how skilled the operators, no matter how effective the tactics, without ammunition, you cannot fight. This lesson applies to modern warfare. Maintain supply chains, protect logistics, and target enemy logistics whenever possible. These lessons were codified in Air Force doctrine and influenced the design of next-generation aircraft. The F-15 Eagle, introduced in the 1970s, incorporated advanced electronic warfare systems from the start. The F-117 stealth fighter, developed in the 80s, was specifically designed to penetrate heavily defended airspace by avoiding detection entirely rather than relying on jamming. The B-1 and B-2 bombers that replaced the B-52 in the strategic role included stealth features and advanced countermeasures. The lessons also influenced how America fought future wars. The Gulf War in 1991 began with an intensive air campaign explicitly modeled on Linebacker 2. Massive strikes using precision weapons, suppression of enemy air defenses, and integrated operations involving hundreds of aircraft. Iraq's air defense system, one of the most sophisticated in the world at the time, was destroyed in days. The difference was that in 1991, America had stealth aircraft, better precision weapons, better jamming, and better tactics. The lessons of Linebacker 2 had been learned. Let me return one final time to the human cost. Because beyond the strategic calculations and technological lessons, this was about people. Young men who flew missions, civilians who endured bombing, families who lost loved ones. 15 B-52 crews were lost. That is 90 to 105 men, depending on crew configurations. Most were in their 20s and 30s. Most had wives. Many had children. Their loss created 90 families that would never be whole again. Captain Dick Johnson, radar navigator on Charcoal 01, the first B-52 shot down, survived ejection and became a prisoner of war. He was released in February 1973. When he returned home, his daughter was 3 years old. She had been 18 months old when he deployed. She did not recognize him. It took months to rebuild that relationship. He later said, "I lost a year of her life, a year I can never get back." That is the cost people do not think about. Not just the men who die, but the families who are damaged even when the men survive. Staff Sergeant Walt Ferguson, tail gunner on Charcoal 01, did not survive. He died in the aircraft when it went down. He was 24 years old. He left behind a young wife and a son he had never met, born while he was deployed. His widow received the standard military benefits, the flag from his memorial service, and a lifetime of wondering what might have been. Multiply this by 15 crews. 15 sets of wives receiving the terrible knock on the door. 15 sets of children growing up without fathers. 15 holes torn in the fabric of communities back home. And that is just the B-52 losses. Add the tactical aircraft crews, the helicopter crews, the men who died when their rescue attempts failed. Each one a tragedy, each one a family destroyed. On the North Vietnamese side, the numbers are larger but less precise. At least 1,600 civilians killed, probably more, thousands wounded, tens of thousands left homeless. How many children lost parents? How many parents lost children? How many families were shattered? In one Hanoi neighborhood, an entire apartment building collapsed when a bomb struck its foundation. 43 people died, trapped in the rubble. Rescue workers dug for days, pulling out bodies. One rescue worker later said, "We found a mother clutching her child, both dead. The mother had wrapped her body around the child, trying to protect him. It did not work. The bomb killed them both. I still see that image when I close my eyes. These are the costs that do not appear in after-action reports. The psychological wounds, the shattered families, the trauma that echoes through generations. Many Linebacker 2 veterans suffer from PTSD. Not just the prisoners who were tortured, not just the men who were shot down. Even the men who completed all their missions and came home unscathed carry scars. They remember friends who did not come back. They remember the terror of flying through missile fields. They remember knowing that any second could be their last. Some cope better than others. Some built successful post-military careers. Some raised families, stayed married, lived apparently normal lives. But even they carry it. Even they wake up sometimes from nightmares where they are back over Hanoi, watching missiles climb toward them, wondering if this is the one with their name on it. Others never fully adjusted. Some marriages failed. Some careers stalled. Some men turned to alcohol or drugs to numb the memories. Some committed suicide years later, unable to escape the ghosts of 1972. This is the true cost of war, not just the dead counted on casualty lists, but the living wounded, the families damaged, the communities scarred. War creates ripples that spread outward for decades, touching people who were not even born when the bombs fell. It has been over half a century since the Christmas bombings. The B-52 Stratofortress still flies, upgraded and modernized, but recognizably the same aircraft that bombed Hanoi in December 1972. The youngest B-52 is nearly 60 years old. The oldest is over 70, and they are expected to serve until 2050 or beyond, meaning the B-52 will have been in service for nearly a century. Vietnam is a different country now, reunified under communist rule since 1975. A growing economy, normalized relations with the United States. Hanoi is a bustling modern city. The craters from 1972 have long since been filled. The destroyed buildings have been rebuilt. The scars are mostly healed, at least physically, but memory remains. In Hanoi, there is a museum dedicated to the air war. On display are pieces of shot-down B-52s, wreckage, engines, sections of fuselage. Visitors, mostly young Vietnamese who were not alive during the war, stare at these relics and try to imagine what it was like. Their grandparents tell them stories, but stories cannot fully convey the reality. In America, the veterans grow old and pass away. Each year, fewer remain. The annual Linebacker 2 reunions grow smaller. Soon there will be none left who remember firsthand. The history will become abstract, something in books and documentaries, no longer living memory. But the lessons remain relevant because wars continue. Air campaigns continue. Nations still try to bomb their way to victory. And the same questions that hung over Linebacker 2 hang over every conflict. Will it work? Is it worth the cost? Are we willing to pay the price? Operation Linebacker 2 worked in the narrow sense that it achieved its immediate objective. It forced North Vietnam back to the negotiating table. It secured the release of American prisoners. It allowed the United States to exit Vietnam with an agreement in place. Mission accomplished. But in the broader sense, it failed. The peace agreement did not hold. South Vietnam fell. The region was destabilized. The costs in lives and treasure, in America's moral standing, were enormous. And the fundamental question remains unanswered. Was any of it necessary? Could skilled diplomacy have achieved the same outcome without the bombing? Would North Vietnam have returned to negotiations anyway, recognizing that time was not on their side with a hostile Congress about to convene? We will never know. History does not offer counterfactuals. What we know is this. 11 days in December 1972, over 700 bomber sorties were flown into the most heavily defended airspace in history. 15 crews were lost. Nearly 100 men were killed or captured. Thousands of Vietnamese died. A city was devastated. And at the end of it, a peace agreement was signed that was essentially identical to what had been. Available 3 months earlier. Was it worth it? Every person must answer that question for themselves. The veterans have their answer, shaped by personal experience and sacrifice. The historians have their answer, shaped by analysis and hindsight. The Vietnamese have their answer, shaped by survival and recovery. But perhaps the most important answer comes from those who were not there, who did not fly those missions, who did not endure that bombing, because they are the ones who will decide whether such operations happen again in the future. They are the ones who will weigh costs against benefits. They are the ones who will authorize the next linebacker to, or refuse to authorize it. To them, I offer this thought: war is always terrible, even when justified, even when necessary, even when it achieves its objectives. The costs are always higher than anticipated. The suffering is always greater than planned. The consequences are always more complex than predicted. Linebacker. 2 demonstrated that air power can be decisive, that strategic bombing can force nations to negotiate, that technology and tactics can overcome even the most sophisticated defenses. These are important military lessons. But it also demonstrated that victory in battle does not guarantee success in war, that political objectives are more important than military achievements, that the human cost of conflict echoes far beyond the battlefield. These are equally important lessons. Remember Linebacker 2. Remember the courage of the airmen who flew those missions. Remember the civilians who endured that bombing. Remember the families shattered on both sides. Remember the price that was paid for 11 days of thunder over Hanoi. And when the next crisis comes, when the next call for military action arises, remember to ask the hardest question. Is this worth the price we will have to pay? Not just in treasure, but in lives. Not just in enemy dead, but in our own wounded. Not just in immediate results, but in long-term consequences. The B-52s over Hanoi in December 1972 were magnificent machines flown by brave men accomplishing a difficult mission, but they were also instruments of destruction that killed thousands and solved nothing permanently. Both truths can coexist. Both truths must be remembered. This is the legacy of Operation Linebacker 2, not a simple story of victory or defeat, but a complex truth about war, peace, courage, cost, and the eternal question of whether the ends justify the means.